Yeah. Well, this is the new era.
I can't share that.
Okay.
Great. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and copies of staff reports are available on the city's website at www.milwaukeeoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting is posted. If you've not reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. Move on to our native lands acknowledgement. The city of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. Moving on to our first order of business, Planning Commission minutes. We'd like to get approval of the February 14th and February 28th, 2023 meeting minutes. Does anyone have any corrections?
Hearing no corrections, I would like to make a motion to accept February 14th, 2023 and February 28th, 2023 minutes as written or as presented.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Maybe just kind of point of order. Which commissioners do we have
I think we got
joining us online? Josh as well? Commissioner
Josh,
Freeman?
what?
Commissioner Freeman.
Okay, great.
Yes, present.
And present.
Commissioner Edge.
Commissioner Edge, great. All right, moving on to 3.0 informational items. Any informational items from staff?
Not informational items. I have a couple of items for the CIAC portion of the meeting.
Great. Can move on then to audience participation. Do we have any members of the audience joining us remotely?
No one's in the audience.
All right, and we have no one in the room. So we will move on to the next item, 5.0. At this point of the agenda, the commission will act as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. Now I ask staff to provide any updates, and if CIAC members have anything to report, now would be a great time to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I have two items to share. First has to do with the Planning Commission recruitment process. There were, according to the city recorder, 35 total applicants
Wow,
for the
that's
various boards and
various
commissions.
boards.
Sorry.
Thought we were popular all
Three of the applicants chose the Planning Commission as their first option, and three as an alternate. So they're still in that process, but just wanted to give folks an update on where we were with that recruitment process. The second item that I wanted to share is that planning staff is scheduling time with all of the NDAs in May and June to present information about so you received a notice about a land use application process. And so we're working on a presentation and informational presentation and discussion with each of the NDAs. So we're working to schedule those, as I said, in May and in June. So we'll be having those conversations.
Great. I appreciate that. I know that's time intensive and takes those resources, but I really think that kind of work helps us deliver on that, goal one in terms of community involvement. Does anyone else have anything they want to ask about or talk about?
I have a comment and a compliment. So I'll start with the compliment first. I was highly impressed by the community development director's email that got sent out that was shared by the planning department, which is a quarterly report about the land use applications, what's going on, and so on and so forth. I find that valuable, and I know that got shared with a lot of people, so thank you very much for that. I also want to tell the CIAC members that our bylaws may actually prohibit us from being able to obtain our goals of being, allowing all the residents to be able to participate. So when the time comes, I would like you all to think about it and discuss it, and maybe allow our land use chairs to be able to sit at the pulpit during only work session items. So I will not be around when that discussion comes, but I want you to really, really think about it, because I think it would be really valuable. And the attorney may jump in here and tell me how hard that process is, but I don't believe that working with our fellow residents, making them informed, should be a hard process. It's just a process.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner Hemer, on that. And maybe it's a good question of, I know our bylaws, when the CIAC was kind of created, there was a conversation that we had about our bylaws. Number of us talked about involvement and engagement as part of that. I don't know if there is a review cycle on updating those bylaws. Also, if I'm recalling, I think those bylaws were kind of approved by City Council, which kind of created the CIAC and vested that was kind of responsibility in us. So I don't even know if it's our bylaws to change in the first place, or if that would be a council action. And maybe we could, A, get a copy of our bylaws, and B, answer the question about if we wanted to change the bylaws, who even does that?
Sure. Well, we've had several public meetings, I think, in the past about changes, incremental changes to the bylaws. We've had wildly differing bylaws between different boards and commissions, and then there's been a move to kind of unify them a little bit to have similar traits. I think that's kind of the most recent action that's been taken on the bylaws. But those are ultimately approved by council, because they create the board or commission whose bylaws are being approved, right? And they give certain authorities and certain decision-making abilities and recommendation abilities, all that stuff. So that's where all of that sits. Okay. Now, I believe, and Vera can check me here, but I believe we have work sessions about in front of the Planning Commission about things that we want to change, or we present you with draft bylaws. And I think the city recorder's office has been the lead proponent of trying to bring them all under one roof, so to speak, because we had just wildly different eras of bylaws, as you can imagine, and certain sets were evolved to meet current standards and certain weren't. So,
and all boards and commissions probably want their own special powers with special things, and I can understand also from a council as well as city manager perspective, wanting to maintain some consistency as well. Yeah.
Sure. So I think that's kind of the skeletal process that would happen. I think we just had a couple of sets before council just recently, actually. Maybe it was the budget committee or the audit committee, something like that rings a bell, where they were revising theirs. If I remember correctly, the Planning Commission bylaws are a pretty advanced set of bylaws, because planning commissions have specific statutory authorities once you create a planning commission. And so a lot of the language that comes from those, of course, deals with hearings and quorums and things like that. Some of those attributes aren't present in some of our other boards and commissions. Anyway, I digress. Sure. A little bit, probably more information than you wanted. But
my point is that I'm asking the CIAC moving forward is not to be scared to stand up for what you believe that the CIAC should be accomplishing, regardless of the barriers that are presented in front of you. Do the change. If you believe in it, do the change. That's all I'm asking. If you don't believe in it, then just leave it the way that it is.
Any other items that we want to discuss as the CIAC? I'll ask pause for our commissioners online. No? Great. All right. Well, we will move on to next order of business, 6.1, which is our hearing item for this evening. This is our code fix housekeeping, which is a type 5 application for a package of quote unquote housekeeping code amendments. The package of housekeeping code amendments is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is for the commission's consideration of application number ZA-2023-002 for code amendments. If anyone is here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and avoid repetition and information not relevant. The moderator may mute you if disruptions occur. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to Milwaukie City Council whether the proposal conforms with the city's applicable criteria. I can now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance section or sections where the criteria can be found.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The approval criteria for code amendments can be found in Milwaukie Municipal Code Section 19.902, amendments to maps and ordinances, and Municipal Code Section 19.1000, review procedures.
Thank you. Does any member of the commission wish to abstain from the hearing?
No.
No?
Nope.
Hearing no's and seeing heads shaking no. Does any member of the commission wish to declare an actual or a potential conflict of interest?
No.
No. Because we're all no's. Well, then let's proceed to the staff report. Vera?
All right. Thanks very much. I am going to share my screen and hope that it works. Okay. Right. So thanks very much. Vera Coley, Senior Planner, here to present our Housekeeping Plus code amendments. They're a little bit more, a little bit more than just regular housekeeping. And I will just point out, if I could, that the City Council did adopt the regular housekeeping code amendments last week. So those will be effective 30 days, so May 18th. Those amendments will be ready to go. Okay. So this is the public hearing follow-up to the work session that we had several weeks ago about the Housekeeping Plus amendments. The goals of this project, these are more substantive amendments that might be a slight shift in policy, but they don't warrant a large public engagement effort. Most of these came about during a review of recent Type 3 variance applications as sort of a first pass to just kind of get a sense of, are there some changes in the code that we should be considering in order to kind of think about where are all of our Type 3 variances coming from. So some of them do involve some clarification, but again, it's not a significant departure from established policy. We had a work session with the Planning Commission. We will have a work session with the City Council about these. We did provide notice to the NDAs when we posted the 30-day notice with the code commentary as well. All right.
Just to clarify, has
Please.
the council work session occurred already?
It has
That'll
not.
be-
No,
Okay, great.
no.
You know, sometimes we stagger our work sessions.
Right.
Sometimes we run them side by side. So just was curious.
We try to do that. The council agendas are fairly packed, so we sometimes have to wait a little while to get onto those. So I think it's this one isn't scheduled until a bit later in June, I believe. So got a little bit of time on that one. Okay, so the first part of the code amendment package involves Title 12, which is the access management section of the code. The purpose of this amendment is to expand the city engineer's authority to modify requirements. A portion of this code section does allow for a modification process that is established through a study with the transportation or qualified engineer. And this has to do with spacing standards. So how far an access way is located from an intersection, for example, width of access ways, number of access ways, that sort of universe of things. But there are a portion of this section of code that does not allow for a modification and requires a type 3 variance. And the commission has entertained some of these type 3 variances before. And given that these are engineering decisions, I like to think of these as math and safety kinds of standards, public safety sorts of standards, that it seemed appropriate to expand the city engineer's authority in that modification process to encompass all of those access management standards. So the proposed language includes revised requirements for that access study. So we've rewritten that section to be very specific about what kinds of information the city engineer requires when asking for one of these modifications, and the process by which the city engineer would issue that or approve that modification. There's also an appeal process that's embedded within that section as well, if the applicant is unhappy with the decision of the city engineer. A question was raised during the work session about providing notice to abutters or an opportunity to comment on a requested modification. So there are two different ways that could be provided. Certainly if the sort of parent land use application itself would be before the Planning Commission or as part of a type 2 review, then there would be public notification as part of the basic land use review process. There could be a situation, though, where the modification is the only thing being requested, that there isn't a land use application, that it is a building permit sort of situation, but an access way is part of it. In that case, if there's not already a land use application, then the question was raised, well, should there be public notice about the modification itself? We talked about it sort of back at the office after the work session. We are not recommending that notice to comment on it because this is a technical component of a development process. It's not a discretionary land use decision. It's a technical review based on established engineering and safety standards. And if we don't have a good, I guess I'll say, a good reason to provide the public comment, what is the purpose of the public comment if it's not likely to affect the outcome of that decision, then we would rather not frustrate the process by notifying folks, but really not providing them a clear avenue for how to comment or affect a change in that decision. Again, because it is an engineering decision, it's kind of again, a math sort of decision based on the expertise of the city engineer and the materials provided by the applicant within the access study. So I know that was something that we discussed at the work session, but staff's recommendation is to not create a new process for a butter notification as part of that modification process if there isn't already sort of a land use application already in effect for that. And I can certainly pause, at each section.
Chair, may we
questions?
ask questions one by one?
Sure, yeah, let's take it one by one for discussion purposes, but stay out of deliberation land.
Chair, so I have a question. Why did the rule exist in the first place? Do you think?
Which rule do you mean?
Why a type 3 variance for this kind of decision?
It's a good question. I don't know the legislative history on this code section. This is an engineering section of code. It's not planning. So I would be guessing, and I'd rather not do that during a public hearing without the answer. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know why some are type 3 and others are not.
All right.
And if I could, through the chair, Commissioner Edge has raised his hand as well. Yeah.
Commissioner Edge.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Vera. So this is one, I think I raised, kind of the question about this, about the appeal process. And really my concern is not, ultimately what I'm worried about, because I agree, generally speaking, these engineering decisions shouldn't be subjected to a land use review process because they're not really land use decisions. So, that makes total sense logically and legally. What I'm concerned about and still kind of concerned about is I'd like to somehow make sure or find out what the assurance is that the decision of the city engineer will be consistent with policies in the comp plan and in the transportation system plan. In particular, if there are specific cases where there is a very specific policy, are there assurances, that the city engineer would not override that policy? That's kind of what I'm concerned about, and that there's only the discretion of that city engineer and the applicant, the property owner that is looking to develop the access. That those are the only parties that are at this point interested or have an interest, have standing to kind of negotiate that decision, which could have an impact on adopted policy. So that's where my concern is. I'm just kind of looking for assurances that these decisions will be made with consistently with our adopted policies.
That's an interesting point, Commissioner Edge. I don't know if anyone has any other questions on this Title 12, or if we want to move on, but I'd love to revisit that question you posed kind of as we move forward in deliberations.
If I could,
Sure.
As part of that, before we get into deliberation. So I think what I'd like, and if I misunderstood the question, Commissioner Edge, in coming back to the hearing, my apologies. I think what I'm wondering is if, and rather than sort of write code while we're sitting here, but what I might suggest that, that we could think of, that the commission could think about is that could be part of what the access study actually would need to include. I mean, the way the code is written right now, there are items that the access study is supposed to include, right? Review of site access spacing design, evaluation of traffic impacts, there's a whole list. And what, I might say, what we could think about, and, I'd want to chat with the city engineer, but this could be a recommendation that comes from you to city council and gives us time to work through this with the city engineer, that there is language that's included as part of that. Number 7, for example, consistency, with comprehensive plan policies, and the transportation system plan, or something like that. So that as part of the access study, the applicant is also reviewing that, as well as the city engineer, because this access study is the basis for the modification. So we've done that, certainly, consistency with other established plans and policies as part of our decision-making process for other things. So that might be something to consider as part of the recommendation going to city council, if you choose to go that way. And I don't want to get into deliberation, and I know we shouldn't, but as something to think about as part of your deliberation,
Sure.
That might be something that that could be talked about.
So that just raises the question, is that typical standard practice for the engineer department?
Well,
Remember, we're calling this is to clear up that it's not a land use issue, that it's actually an engineer. I mean,
Right.
Is that typical common practice?
the transportation system plan includes a whole list of improvements and timelines for improvements, and that informs the capital improvements plan. So these planning documents, but they are transportation planning documents that are part of the engineering department's sort of part of their.
But I think
universe of things as well.
and I don't want to talk in front of Commissioner Edge, but I think he's also talking about our comprehensive plan as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the transportation section of the comprehensive plan is part of the TSP. And so relevant sections of that plan that's why I'm proposing it as something that we would work on back at the office as part of your recommendation. If you choose to do that as part of your deliberation, we can go from there. So, but before we move topics, I just wanted to kind of.
But I think it's probably a question that you would certainly be unprepared to answer at this point, but it might be a thing we'd follow up on is, we might have adopted policies, whether through the comprehensive plan or the transportation system plan, that for one reason or another don't necessarily jive with current adopted traffic engineering practices.
Right.
But as a community, we've decided we want to go further than maybe our risk-averse traffic engineers around the U.S. are currently okay with, how do we square those two things? And how do we make sure that what we've said we want as a community is what we get and not something that's more boilerplate?
And this is part of that meatier discussion, and that's why we called it Housekeeping
Yeah,
Plus.
Housekeeping Plus. Well, let's move on to our next item if we don't have anything else on this.
Okay. We are proposing a new definition for plex development, that we actually have a definition for that because we are using that term in a couple of places within the code, and we just want to make sure that we're consistent in defining that. That plex development are the duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, because in some sections of the code, they are in fact different from cottage clusters or townhouses, and we don't want to use the umbrella term of middle housing all the time if that's not the appropriate terminology. Okay. We had some discussion about this item during the work session as well. But this proposed amendment relates to corner lots specifically for townhouse development. And as we explained during the work session, we wrote the middle housing code and then people proposed things. And now we get to see where the middle housing code might need some tweaks. So the purpose of this amendment is it's related to the lot size range for townhouses. And we have a maximum lot size of townhouses townhouses of 2,999 square feet. However, that has the effect of disallowing townhouses on corner lots because of our street side yard setback. Because when you meet those minimums, that corner lot will almost always be too large than the 2,999 square feet. So what we are proposing, and we know, and I think most of us know, that we try to write code that applies to most scenarios, and there's always going to be one that it doesn't work, or some, but a typical depth for many lots in the city is 100 feet. So a lot that's 35 by 100 feet would exceed that maximum lot size. And that's because these are 25 by 100 lots typically on a lot of our underlying lot line or platted lots. So the intent of the code amendment is to increase the minimum lot size or the maximum lot size for townhouses on a corner lot to 3,500 square feet. And that accounts for that 35 by 100 measurement. Again, we think it will work for in most cases. We do have a type 2 variance process that might be able to tweak that a little bit if necessary. And then this sketch shows an example of where this has exactly come up at Jackson 52nd Ave. So we're hoping that makes sense and that we can move forward with that proposal. I don't know if there are any questions about that. Okay, move on. We had a proposed amendment regarding the GMU zone and the type 3 height variance, and there was a lot of discussion about that at the work session. And I like to avoid a lot of stuff if we don't need to take care of it. So we are proposing to just scratch that. We're not proposing that any further until we have some more time to really dig into it and really get into that. It's certainly it's more than Housekeeping Plus. So I think we need to punt that to another package of code amendments. We're proposing to take that out of this package.
A double plus or maybe even a
supersize. I don't know. Yeah, we'll come up with something. We'll come up with something to call it. We are proposing to revise the applicability of the design standards in the NMIA. And this relates specifically, there was an example of the expansion of the warehousing building at 2107 Morse Street. And that building was way at the back of the lot. But the design standards applied to that building regardless of how far away it was from the street. And this has come up in other cases when folks have asked us about building additions or new buildings on some of these key streets when it is far away from the street. So we are proposing that it's only for development that's within 50 feet of that front or the street side yard lot line. The discussion at the work session talked about a question was raised about that proposed applicability. We haven't changed the recommendation because the purpose of the design standards is an acknowledgement of the relationship that a building has with the street. And beyond 50 feet, you have 2 bays of parking for example, if you had parking in front of the building plus the travel lane. So at that point, the building is not creating that relationship with the street. The design standards are all about materials, glazing, all of that kind of streetscape design. So the design standards aren't intended to relate are not intended to relate to buildings that might be visible from the street. It's the ones that create that relationship with the street. So it's more about that direct relationship with the right of way. So we are continuing to propose the 50-foot sort of applicability as kind of creating that streetscape design. Happy to answer any questions, or certainly, as part of your deliberation, you can certainly do that. But we think that 50 feet sort of sets that tone for the building's relationship with the street. Okay. All right. We've got a couple of proposals within the supplementary development regulation, section 500. We are proposing that we would allow back decks to encroach up to 6 feet into that rear yard setback, just as we do for the front porches. This is for sort of the first floor kind of ground level back decks, not the ones from the second floor. Those ones would still need to meet the setback or seek a variance. But these are for the up to 18 inches off the back, kind of idea. They would still be allowed to have a roof, but they would not be enclosed. Similar, again, matching our front porch encroachment exemption. And then we are proposing to revise the applicability of the design standards to what we call a type B accessory structure. So those are up to 600 square feet and up to 15 feet in height. The code right now would not allow the type B accessory structure to have metal siding. It requires to be what the code calls residential, sort of, so kind of siding. And so we get a lot of requests about that, about metal siding for the type B accessory structure. So we are proposing that we would in fact allow for the metal siding up to that type B, to include the type B design.
And the reminder, I think, for all of the members of the audience is that we currently allow the up to 600 square feet, up to 15 feet tall, if it was with wood or other materials.
Correct, yes.
So
we're
really just talking about the
material.
characteristic of the material.
That's right,
Yeah.
yes, yep. We're not changing the setbacks, none of that. It's just about the construction materials of that.
So, Vera, I just have a real quick question. When we say non-enclosed, does that mean one side, a quarter of it, all of it? What does that mean? Some people like to, on their back deck, like to put a chimney or a fireplace with a TV in front of it, but they still leave a quarter of it open. Does that mean, what does non-enclosed actually mean?
We should leave it sufficiently vague so that it requires a type 3 for us to answer that question. Sorry for the heavy sarcasm.
We're gonna scrap it. Just kidding. Certainly for a front porch, the way we define unenclosed is there aren't any walls. They're literally just the posts. So I think in the situation that you're asking about, I think we would want to, that's something that we hadn't thought about, someone wanting to partially put up part of a wall or something like that. Generally, I don't want to speak for the planning manager. I think that would be something we would review on a case-by-case basis, unfortunately. I think, but generally, if it were part of one wall, then I think we could still make the argument that that's not an enclosed back porch. If there were something like if they were doing an outdoor television or a chimney or something like that. But I don't want to speak for the planning manager, and it's not something that we discussed. It's a good question, though, but I don't know that I have a good answer for you based on that question. So, yeah. It's not intended to have walls. That's generally that.
So then in the second portion of that, does that mean that we are changing the design standards, right? Because our residential design standards call for wood, masonry, or cement siding, right? And now we're kind of changing, allowing for metal siding, at least on these accessory dwellings. Does that cause?
Not dwellings, right?
I'm
Structure.
sorry.
Accessory structure.
I'm sorry, accessory
Not
structure. Sorry, I get very confused about we all,
Sheds and shops.
but does that, could that potentially cause an issue for changing design standards for other buildings? Does that open up a gateway for anything like that?
So we don't have required materials for residential structure. So for a house, if someone wanted to build a standing seam metal house and that met building code, our design standards for residential structures do not require certain materials.
Thank you.
You get credit for certain materials, but we don't require certain materials. So no, that wouldn't, there wouldn't be, there's no effect of this that somehow it bleeds over into the.
So the design, by changing this, it actually matches more the design standards of a house than it does not allowing it.
Right, I mean, yeah, the code wants it to be wood siding or something like that.
Right.
The larger the structure it is, but this reflects, I think, common construction practice for shops and sheds that standing seam metal.
And this does not allow for corrugated plastic or anything like that to be put on.
It's very
the side.
specific to metal, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Could have a Guggenheim shed to match your Guggenheim metal house.
Right.
Can I ask what the specific issue that this is addressing? Is it an issue of coverage, of additional roof square footage, or is what? The reason why I'm bringing this up is is it an issue? Again, the porch. Is it that it's covered, or is it that it's enclosed? And is the change addressing what we're trying to address? If that's clear.
I think so. So right now, if you build a covered back deck, and by covered, I just mean that it has a roof, it would need to meet the minimum rear yard setback. There's no encroachment option.
Yeah.
We have many homes that were built in some of our older subdivision in the 60s, 70s kinds of thing that were built to the setbacks. So, and certainly during the pandemic, when folks were spending a lot more time at home and doing things at home, we had several requests for back decks, but they wanted a roof over them so they could enjoy them, more times of the year. And they would have all needed a type 3 variance in order to build that. If it didn't have a roof, and it was up to 18 inches, basically a patio, you can just build that. It's once you put the cover over it, then we consider that part of an expansion of the structure, and the setbacks apply to the posts, of that deck.
And sorry, Vera, and the setbacks, was it 15?
20 feet.
20 feet.
Right.
Whereas you could go put your patio 6 feet or even less than that.
Yeah.
So I think it's just trying to bring some uniformity. We allow this for this kind of structure.
Right.
When you put a roof over it, does it have a substantive change to it?
And I think, and because the front porch encroachment allowance has been in the code for quite some time, as part of that feature. So, you can have a front porch now 14 feet from the front yard setback. And the more requests we saw, we didn't see a kind of an appreciable difference between those two things. I understand that you have sort of backyards that abut one another, but it seemed a reasonable request, to allow for that back deck to be covered and be able to encroach up to the 6 feet. So that's the difference. The cover is what made the difference when the setbacks apply and when they don't.
And does the wall, the enclosure, have any effect with it being covered, is my question.
So if walls are now placed around that, so now it's an addition, it's not a back deck, that would need to meet the setbacks.
Okay.
So the encroachment is really specific to something that's sort of lighter than a full blown addition, that it's a back deck with a cover.
And having a 4-foot railing is that considered enclosed or is that?
No, the railing wouldn't. I mean,
Okay.
it's open. It wouldn't be considered a
Okay.
wall. No. Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, right. Sorry. Thank you. And I'm just to help the way the code is written now for porches. So again, the floor doesn't exceed, is no higher than 18 inches. So we're trying to match the front porch encroachment thing.
Is that from grade or from?
Grade.
Okay.
Average grade is
helpful.
Yep. The porch is not enclosed on any side other than what is enclosed by the exterior walls of the dwelling. So that one side. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, say that one
It
more
could be
time.
two sides as well.
So the porch is not enclosed on any side other than what is enclosed by the exterior walls of the dwelling.
Okay.
So the main dwelling establishes any enclosure, but there can't be anything other than that. Thank you.
And 18 inches off the ground, I don't think requires a railing by building code anyways.
Again, I'm thinking more of, there's plenty of homes in the area that have a significant grade change in their lot where 18 turns to 24 to 32 pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah, so we use average grade to establish that.
Yeah.
And thank you. And the code, the railings up to 3 feet is what would be permitted for railings. If they're taller than 3, then we have an issue with the enclosure. And that's, again, from the definition of the code.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Edge, Vice Chair Freeman on this, or are we ready to move on?
I don't see any hands
Great.
raised. Okay. Cottage clusters. Right now, the code only allows detached cottages in the moderate density residential zone, and we do allow attached cottages in the high density residential zone. But there aren't any more details than that. So we were trying to kind of clean this up, having seen several cottage cluster applications or pre-applications come in, so we can see kind of what are the designs looking like for cottage clusters. So we are proposing to revise the development standards to allow attached cottages in the moderate density zone up to 3. So I'll call it a little triplex cottage. But all the cottage standards still apply as far as the footprint of each individual cottage. So all those size limitations still remain, but it's about efficiency of construction and allowing those that kind of a bit more flexibility in how folks construct them. We don't have a number in the attached cottages in the high-density residential zone that already existed. We are proposing 4. It is the high-density residential zone. If it's 5 or more, then that's considered multi-unit development in our code. So up to 4 seemed like the right math to be able to figure that out. We didn't want to have any kind of a conflict with multi-unit development. So that is the proposal. I think I had some images here of what we've seen from some attached cottages. The image on the left is from Cully Green up in Northeast. And then the picture on the right is from a very conceptual sketch from a proposal that is being considered here in the city. It looks like they have certainly more than 3 attached, but just kind of having a sense of what those attached cottages could look like.
And just a clarifying question, if we could go back one slide.
Yes.
The limit attached cottages in RHD to 4, is that 4 with 3 each? So like 12 units total, is that?
So, right, so you can have up to 12 cottages as part of a cluster.
Okay.
So those 12 could be in 3 blocks of 4. If you see, so you can't have more than 4 units together in one sort of construction. That was how we were thinking about that. What we're seeing are 2s and 3s, frankly, as far as kind of the connected cottages or the attached cottages.
And then could you share more on how that eliminates the perceived conflict with multi-unit development?
Multi-unit development is defined as a structure with 5 or more units. So what we didn't want to have is sort of trying to figure out, but it's 5 units in, they're attached, but it could be considered a structure with 5 units in it. We didn't want to start adding multi-unit development standards or anything to that. It's a cottage cluster. That's what it is. If we didn't multi-unit development needs to stand separately from the cottage cluster design.
And I apologize, it's been a long day, so I might just be having a hard time digesting, is if multi-unit development is 5 or more units, and if we're saying you can have, maybe for simplicity's sake, 4 structures with 3 units in each structure, you have 12 units total,
Yes.
which is more than the 5. And are we maybe setting up a conflict between what we're trying to do in the RHD and what we would be incentivizing here?
Multi-unit development is 5 or more units in a structure, not on a site. So, and a cottage cluster is a minimum of 3, maximum of 12 units. What we're suggesting is that those units, up to 4 of them, can be attached as part of the development design, as opposed to having to be detached. That's the difference. And I want to make sure I'm explaining it clearly.
I think I hear Commissioner Hemer saying he's got it, and
Yeah.
Is that up to a max based on lot?
No, it's about cluster. So you could have, and we will see some, and they may come here, actually. A cottage cluster development could be made up of multiple clusters. So a larger lot, let's make up 3 acres, could have 3 cottage clusters as part of the lot, but those clusters are up to 12 units around a green. They have their own setbacks. They're sort of set up here. But if it's a larger development, they don't need to divide it. They can have a cluster here, a cluster here, a cluster here. But all of those standards that relate to a cottage cluster, as far as the size of the green, the units facing the green, that kind of thing, those all apply to each of the individual clusters. But one larger site could have more than one cottage cluster on it. Is that?
And I want to make sure that the Plex development helps to define the difference between this cottage cluster and what I would call a 4-plex, no matter how it sets up, but it helps kind of resolve that issue, right?
A plex development is on a lot, so it's up to, so a quadplex site is 1 lot with 4 units on it, period. Cottage cluster is very different. There are very specific, it has its own section. It has specific requirements for a common green, orientation of the units to the green, limitations on the size. It has different setbacks. So there are, we have folks looking at their lots trying to figure out, do I want to do a plex or do I want to do a cottage cluster? A cottage cluster allows you to do more units on 1 lot, but and again, it's all trade-offs, right? So you get smaller setbacks, and those are set up by House Bill 2001 by the state law itself. Minimum setbacks for a cottage cluster is 6 feet. A plex development is 20. You're subject to the same standards here, but you get more units, but they have to be smaller, but you have to face a green. So there's other, different lots lend itself better depending on sort of what the applicant is looking to do. An applicant could subdivide a larger parcel into multiple lots and do a plex on each of those lots. It just kind of depends on sort of what's the right thing. It really is a salad bar of options for folks depending on the size of their lot. But in this case, we're trying to provide some options for the design of a cottage cluster to see if we can get to still kind of meet sort of the intent of a cottage cluster, smaller units, but by attaching some of those smaller units, we are getting some efficiency in construction, and developers are telling us they can, maximize.
I'll refrain. I don't know if anyone has any other questions on this item.
I do want to maybe emphasize making sure that the addition of allowing 3 units to be attached, it doesn't preclude all of the other requirements in terms of what is required for a cottage cluster regarding access to the green space, right? And so as long as that is clear, I'm just want to make sure that's
Great.
Yep.
clear. Thank you.
No, excellent point, and that's definitely our intent, is that
Yeah.
everything still stays the same, but you can glue them together, I guess, basically. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Again, the photos. All right. We have a proposed amendment regarding, so it's a clarification within the EV infrastructure requirements that was already adopted into code. The revision to the parking code language would clarify that the new requirements for electric vehicle charging infrastructure applies when new parking spaces, actual new parking spaces are constructed, and the new or existing use involves a building. So there doesn't need to be a new building, but the new parking that is constructed goes with a building. So it serves a building. The amendments would also extend the EV charging requirement to commercial parking structures. So a literal parking garage would be, the charging requirements would be applicable to that as well.
And would that also be inclusive of surface parking lots where
Yes.
there is no structure? Or I guess it would still be tied to the development of a structure. But
Yes.
surface lot, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but
So-
yeah.
Help me out on this. If I build a house and I put in no garage and no driveway,
It wouldn't
which
apply.
is allowed, I don't have to build an EV charging station.
No, because it's 5 or
But
more
if I
units.
build a garage or if I build a driveway, I would have to.
No, the applicability of the EV charging requirements are for buildings that are commercial, industrial, multi-unit with 5 or more dwelling units, or a mixed-use building with 5 or more dwelling units.
And mixed use also
Commercial
is-
and multi, yeah, like,
Oh, I'm sorry. Does not include cottage clusters.
no, it does not.
Okay.
Nope.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And then the client,
I do want to
Yes.
clarify or ask the question if there's any, what's the impact for a developer in terms of is there a level or a gradient of having to provide EV charging stations? However, the impact or the cost of providing such stations is, for lack of a better term, ludicrous to bring electrical to that particular area if there's no such infrastructure already there. I don't know if that's a fair question to ask, or if that maybe someone else
It might
can
be outside
clarify.
the scope of the Housekeeping Plus.
Right.
It sounds like a questioning the larger kind of policy that was already approved, came
Yeah.
down through the state, but I don't know if
I don't want to.
But the answer is that they can always come back with a type 3 variance to prove economic impact,
Sure.
right, and not have to do it.
Adam?
I'm not totally sure. Justin might have a response to whether they could pursue a type 3 variance to the state requirements. I'm not sure if they could. But to the point of it's when new parking is constructed that this goes in. And you have 2 options for compliance. One is to do EV capable, which is essentially the conduit
Sure.
and the trenching and all of that to a certain number of spaces. Or you can do that trenching and conduit, et cetera, to a smaller number of spaces if you include a small number of EV chargers, is how it's set up right now.
And the conduit doesn't necessarily mean actually pulling copper or wires from an existing.
It's
yeah, okay.
just the tube, and you don't have to necessarily install the electrical capacity yet. You just have to have space reserved for future installation of that capacity, because you'll need your wires and all that will need to be sized based on the chargers that you're putting in.
Again, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't get into a situation where someone didn't want to pursue development based on understanding the cost of, having to provide such.
Yeah, I think that is probably outside the scope of
Correct,
Housekeeping
yeah,
Plus.
I
It
agree,
was
yeah.
something the state already told us we're doing. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Noted. Thank you.
Commissioner Edge.
Oh, yes, great. Commissioner Edge?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vera. So with respect to the EV charging requirements, I see that, we're talking about all new parking that's associated with commercial buildings. And so what my question is, how does this apply to a car dealership?
To a car dealership. Can you maybe ask provide a little bit more?
Well, I mean,
That
anywhere
question.
a vehicle is parked on a site is a parking space. Or, it has to be in a parking space, particularly if it's outside. An indoor showroom is one thing, but outside, where cars are parking spaces and have to meet the standards of a parking space. And so, oftentimes, at least, so my familiarity with the county code, at least, because there's a ton of parking of, car lots, in the county, is that they're obviously exempt from the maximum number of parking spaces. I'm sure that applies here in the city as well. I just don't remember where that specific code is, but we're still talking about parking spaces for cars that are parked on a site, and it's a commercial operation that's building those parking spaces. And so, do they have to require? Is that where the variance comes into play, or how does the code kind of handle that situation?
There is there has been some ambiguity and some kind of unanswered questions as this has been getting implemented. We did a lot of clarifying with the Building Codes Division in sort of coming up with what we're proposing here. And one of the clarifications was if someone does have, and because there was a development of a car lot, and we were trying to understand what constitutes constructing a new parking space. We got the clarification that painting lines absolutely is not constructing a new parking space. If you've already, basically the asphalting is the constructing of the parking space. So that might help a little. So if someone were to add extra parking spaces on their car lot, then that would not constitute that. There are still some gray areas, and we have to work. We've been essentially given the guidance to work with our building official and their interpretation of the code when we hit a lot of these ambiguities, because I think we had a lot of questions for them about applicability in that scenario where we had someone taking over a car lot and wanting to do some development, adding a building on it, but are they actually constructing new parking if they're just setting it up a little bit differently, drawing the lines a little bit differently, because the pre-existing lot had no lines at all.
So a land purchase wouldn't necessarily trigger this type of upgrade?
No, the only triggers for this are the type of building that is being served by newly constructed parking. So if there's no newly constructed parking, it doesn't apply. And if there's newly constructed parking that's not serving a building, it doesn't apply. So there's
a commercial parking structure.
Right.
And that's why that is included.
Because it is a building.
It is a building.
And Portland did the same thing. They included a piece about commercial parking structures because they were concerned there was a bit of a loophole where they wouldn't get covered.
So to reiterate, if a commercial development purchased the adjacent lot that increased its potential parking by 50%, that wouldn't trigger any of the electric vehicle charging station requirement?
They're not building any new parking.
Okay.
If it's already there.
Yeah, if the parking is serving a qualified building on site is the language in the rule. And I think a site can be determined a little bit differently than like a tax lot. So sometimes when we're doing development review, we take two properties and we say, this is the site. So if it's across the street, if it's down the road, you start to, that's where some of the ambiguity is. It hasn't been fully tested, I don't think, by actual development proposals.
Okay.
So just to clarify, in the case where we have a undeveloped lot, someone wants to put a car dealership there, and they're building a lot of parking for storage of merchandise on the lot that is outside, but also associated with a new building that's going up also on that lot, do they have to electrify or provide infrastructure for the electrification of 50% of all of those parking spaces? That's what I'm not clear on.
And I think the rule is intended to apply to vacant site development. So to the extent that the property already has established parking spaces and they're not adding any more.
So I'm trying to use a vacant site as the example because that's what you brought up, is that this is about a new development. So the clearest, easiest example should be starting from a vacant site and putting in a new car dealership. And so that's the example I'm trying to get clarity about.
It would require compliance with the rules for sure.
Perfect.
If you're establishing a building that is being served by the parking and you're constructing new parking, it would apply.
Okay. Yep, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
And I don't know. In terms of, Commissioner Edge, I don't know how, if we're dealing with any of those situations within Milwaukee's jurisdictional limits, but I had a question in terms of new structures. New structure does not include major renovations. And I don't think that it does. And it's just understanding kind of the larger policy, not our housekeeping plus. Is that correct? So it's a new building, not, Commissioner Edge's question got me thinking about, the car dealership getting the major renovation and those kinds of things. So I don't know if if you have an answer on that. And I also understand there is ambiguity in the new rules.
Yeah. And I think that's another ambiguous one just in terms of like interpretation.
Okay.
And it hasn't been, a lot of these scenarios haven't played out
Sure.
yet.
Yeah.
So
Great. That's
we're
fine.
still, we've asked a lot of questions. So this is like one instance of clarifying this. And I suspect as people actually try to come in and do development. So if you're building an addition, but you're adding parking to serve the addition, I'm not totally sure
Okay.
myself whether that would apply or not. But we did ask that question of the Building Codes Division. So I think it's really our building official who would kind of make that call.
Okay. Yeah, it's a brave new world. We'll figure some of those things out as we move forward.
And would that be contingent on a change of use as well in terms of, and I know this gets into, sorry, I don't want to belabor the point, but let's say a gym goes under and now becomes a grocery store, or that square footage is taken over by the adjacent grocery store. Does that trigger, and this gets into parking requirements, which may already be answered by there are no parking requirements. So I just want to make sure that's clear in how we're addressing.
If you're not constructing new parking, then these rules don't apply.
Yep.
It's like kind of the key bottom line, like one sentence version.
Okay.
Great.
Great. Well, why don't we move on to the next piece?
You mean the
is the
best
last
piece?
one. This is the last
best
one.
piece.
The last
one.
The lastest, bestest.
Okay. And this came up during the work session. So the direction that we received was that Planning Commission wanted to see an amendment that talked about vacation rentals and revising the requirements for vacation rentals and to require screening that is similar to flag lots and back lots. So we took language, we didn't sort of cut and paste because it didn't quite work. But the idea is that continuous screening of some kind, either through vegetation or through fencing, is required along the rear and the side lot lines of the vacation rental property when it abuts a residential lot. So if in the instance where, and we have this for flag lots and back lots, if there's existing vegetation, you don't have to put a fence up if there's already existing screening kind of thing. We're not asking people to cut things down to put stuff up sort of idea. But that would be one of the requirements as part of that conditional use review for vacation rentals. We did in sort of talking earlier today, there could be a situation where an applicant might make the case to not install the screening, and that will be part of the conditional use review. Perhaps the lots next door are vacant, or the neighboring residential structure itself is really set far back, from those property lines. There could be, on a case-by-case basis where putting up a new fence and all of these things might not be warranted. That would be part of the conditional use review. It's not a variance because this is this discretionary review. So there could be a situation where that requirement might be asked to kind of be waived as part of that application process.
So it doesn't cost anybody any more money to
Nope.
ask questions because they got to pay the money anyways to be up here.
They're already here. So, right. So, but that, I just wanted to highlight that instance could be the case, and it would be handled through that conditional use review process.
Any questions from members of the commission for staff on this?
Have we considered anything clear and objection, that would help a developer understand what would be required if they thought, I have a case for not doing screening based on what's existing? Like, I'm within 20 feet or I just want to,
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's something that we've thought of that is a little more clear than just discretion of this body.
No, the staff approached this as this is a requirement. And so we did not create scenarios within the code that might exempt you from that requirement. We sort of thought about this as someone will have to make that case, and it'll be up to the planning commission to approve, that, I'll call it a waiver, but, or to allow someone to not have to install the fencing. But no, so we didn't consider that. We assumed it's a requirement, you'll need to do it. Left it at that.
And a follow-up question to that, and forgive me for not doing my homework. Do we have a definition of what screening is so that, again, that's defined and we understand, or a developer understands when they are going to be required to provide screening versus what is existing cuts muster or not?
Nope, so I shouldn't be so glib about it. The code does not provide terrific guidance on that. The wording you see here, site obscuring fencing or landscaping, that is what the code says on the flag lots and back lots as well. And that's what we're using as well. So we did not do more clarification on that than what was existing. Yeah.
Wood fences are fine, chain link fences are probably not fine.
Exactly.
Well, chain link fences with slots,
slats.
as long as
There you go.
probably if it's got, but it might have to be 6 foot high.
Do we have any other?
And it can be 6 feet high, sorry.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
it
it's
still needs to meet the fence code, and up to 6 feet on the side and the rear lot lines is permitted under the fence regulations anyway. Yep.
Any other questions from the commission on this, or?
I just had a quick question on the kind of procedure here for having this added into the code, Chair, if I might.
Yes.
I just, this, there's a, this provision was requested by, I think maybe one member of the commission. I wouldn't say this was requested by the commission as a whole, and was definitely not, taken to a vote to be put it in. But I just have a question procedurally, kind of, this seems to be a major departure from the existing policy. And I just not sure this is the appropriate way or appropriate to have this put into the code. So I just have a question on it. Procedurally, is this, what qualifies a major change in policy or departure from established policy? Because this seems like contrary to what the current policy states.
And that one to staff to maybe take a first stab at.
Sure. And to the extent to your comment, Vice Chair Freeman, about staff left the work session with, you're right, we didn't do a straw poll or a vote of the Planning Commission, but we heard more than what one person, certainly Commissioner Hemer was the one who raised the question, but we left the work session understanding that more than a couple of members of the commission were okay with this idea. So if we misunderstood that direction, then apologies, but that was our understanding, that it was more than just Commissioner Hemer that was entertaining the idea and wanted to see this in the code. As far as a departure of policy, I think if by what you mean, I think what you mean is the policy around allowing vacation rentals in the city. What this is, so we still allow vacation rentals in the city. I think what this would be doing is adding an additional requirement to vacation rentals. We do require, obviously as a conditional use, that it is recorded with the county. We require notification to neighbors. So we've added a requirement as part of the vacation rentals process. I'm not sure that I would consider that a policy change specifically.
Well, I guess my question for policy change is, now that we're making the applicant pay this extra money to put in, if there's not existing screening or flagging, we're asking them to pay additional funds to pass the process. So that's the change in policies, that we're essentially charging them a fee or a tax or whatever you want to call it, in order to get this passed, to get their application approved.
Right.
That's a change in policy, in my opinion.
Okay.
Maybe just on the procedural side of your question, Vice Chair Freeman, I think that maybe once we move out of questions into any public testimony and into deliberation, we can take a straw poll, see if we need to, strike anything before we are able to pass a package tonight. So I think that Vera, I would support staff's recollection of there might have been more support for this than not in our informal discussion. And so I think that's why staff was bringing that back. But if we want to have a more robust discussion as a commission about potentially striking this requirement, I think that would be something we would do after we've finished our clarification questions and move forward in the hearing.
I do want to clarify, is vacation rental separate from short-term or long-term rental?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the vacation rental is the only one that requires a conditional use application.
Okay.
Okay, and then last slide, staff would ask for a vote of some kind to recommend approval of the amendments to City Council, so we can move this forward. And that's the conclusion of the.
Perfect. I just want to make sure, though, that I wasn't cutting off Vice Chair Freeman for any questions on this last on MCC 19905. So wanted to make sure we got our questions out before we move forward.
I'm fine with questions. I think we can discuss further during deliberations.
Great.
Thanks, Jim.
Not having you in the room, I wanted to just make sure you had a chance to ask anything. Well, fantastic. Have we received any correspondence on the matter?
Not a thing.
Not a thing.
No.
Okay. We don't have anyone here in the physical audience with us. Anyone in the virtual audience wishing to testify?
No.
No. Maybe we'll say going, gone on questions from the commission for our staff speakers. Well, I will close the public testimony portion of the hearing. The public testimony portion of the hearing on our code fix housekeeping plus amendments, file ZA-2023-002 is now closed. Is the commission ready for discussion? And I'm sure we are. And I would really, I think, like to try and take it one piece at a time so that we can make sure we've figured out where we've landed and then we can move forward. So maybe we can start at the top. And yeah, thank you, Commissioner Edge. I was going to actually invite you to lead us off on this one since you were the one who raised some questions that I think are worth discussing more.
Awesome. Thank you, Chair. So yeah, what I would like to do is I really appreciate Vera's recommendation. I think that was probably the best way to handle this. Is that in our recommendation to council that we forward to council, that we would say that we would like a standard or one of the criteria for one of these modifications, to be, consistency with adopted comprehensive plan, transportation system plan policies, something, and other adopted plans, something like that, because we may have, special neighborhood district plans, that, override, even the TSP, at some point. And so, anyway, just the ability to, just to make sure that, the adopted policies of the city are considered, and are a major consideration in the criteria for approving some modification like this is just really important to me. So I hope that it would be, important to the commission as well. So that would be my recommendation is essentially taking exactly what Vera said and kind of adopting that recommendation into our own to city council.
So would you be comfortable with saying, taking into consideration the comprehensive plan, the TSP, and any other adopted plans towards city engineer's authority, or?
As well.
What would be the concrete language that we would put in there?
I was noodling on this when Commissioner Edge asked this, I think, excellent question. So again, I really appreciate that. And, some on-the-fly wordsmithing that I was trying out was, something about consistency with all applicable goals and policies in the comprehensive plan, transportation system plan, and any other relevant plan, just, casting a pretty wide net there.
Chair,
and Justin is
if I may.
speaking up to maybe.
Well, I have not given this issue a great deal of thought, having it just being proposed tonight. However, without concrete examples, it's really difficult to determine whether or not a certain policy should override perhaps an inconsistent policy, right? We could find ourselves with two comp plan policies in a particular factual situation that might be at odds with each other, right? I mean, it's really.
But that happens all the time, right?
And I think, and maybe that might be one of the situations where they should come before the planning commission. We should have a robust discussion rather than.
I'm not. Folks are welcome to recommend all you want.
Sure.
I understand what you're getting. I understand what you're getting at. What you could be setting up, if you have to remember, the reason why this is going from a type 3 to a type 2 is because it's a mathematical problem, right? And we're trying to take out the situation where you get 5 or 6 people coming to a type 3 or 500 or 600 people coming to a type 3 variance process saying, oh, it's unsafe if you do this. But if the calculations work with the engineering standards, the site distance and a variety of things, how do you weigh that? Okay, now that's not getting to the comp plan issue. But that's why I believe staff has highlighted this as a housekeeping, because oftentimes we have come in before the planning commission with applications for these sorts of things. And the planning commission is like, why are we here? This is a no-brainer because it's a math problem. And the city engineer is entrusted with making those determinations. I am by no means advocating for not following the comp plan or any other plan or rule or regulation. I'm just in any particular factual situation, you could have competing interests, right? And in that situation, how is the city engineer, who's not, writing a great deal of information, he's looking at his numbers and checking the TSP is obviously very important because that deals with safety and a variety of other issues. But we could find ourselves in some situations where it is truly two different policies in conflict.
But it could also be 14 in support and 1 in conflict as well.
It could be, but any of that's I think looking at it through an eye of the comp plan is important to understand that. But the comp plan is much more general than the very specific engineering standards. The city engineer is both educated and professionally certified to administer. Right.
So I don't want to get hung up on theoreticals, during a public hearing and we're deliberating, but what I think we're hoping to accomplish is not to, we don't want to bring more hearings to the Planning Commission for things that aren't really our jurisdiction. These aren't land use review issues. We just want to make sure that, like, if we have a policy about access spacing, access standards, the design of access ways, that ultimately what gets approved by the city engineer is consistent with those policies, for those kinds of for that kind of infrastructure, and if there's specific standards or policies that are called out for specific streets or specific segments of streets, or whatever, then I think that should weigh in as a fact, that should be a factor, that is considered by the city engineer when making these decisions. So I would just like to see that, that the goals and policies of the comp plan, TSP, and other adopted plans are a criterion for the review. And I think Vera said it best when she said that the applicant has to produce materials such as a study to justify the modification, and consistency with the goals and policies of the comp plan and TSP, et cetera, would be part of what's required in there. I think and what we're doing is we're just, as a commission, we're just saying, hey, we want to make sure that as this moves forward, that the policies that we're adopting, that the city's adopting, are a criterion. And then we're kind of punting to staff to figure out exactly how to implement that. City Council is going to have a work session, on this. They haven't had their work session yet, if I heard Vera correctly. So that's an opportunity for City Council and staff to kind of play around with some ideas for what the code might actually look like. So I don't want us to worry about covering all of our bases or trying to, everything right now. I just want to say, I think it's important that one of the criterion is our comp plan policies and TSP policies that, we as a city have adopted and gone through a public process to adopt. So I just like to see that as just called out explicitly as one of the criterion for the review by the city engineer.
See a number of planning commission heads in the room shaking. Vice Chair Freeman, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, or if we're maybe ready to straw poll on this and then move forward.
I'm ready to straw poll, Chair.
Maybe just generally, how's everybody feel with Commissioner Edge's recommendation?
I like Commissioner Edge's recommendation as long as it's within the normalcy of the engineering department. In other words, I don't want to create a whole big old thing that they all have to educate themselves on because of this. So as long as it's what I would call in the normalcy of doing business, that they actually do this anyways, then I'm fine with it. If they have to hire somebody to actually to accomplish this every time this comes up, then I might have a little different.
Sure. Well, and I think as we're hearing, if the applicant is requesting a modification, they have to do some due diligence and probably work with some traffic engineers and prepare a report already. The request is that that report would include a section that the applicant would be responsible for completing, saying how their proposed modification aligns with our goals. So what our engineering department would be doing would be reading that document and saying, yes, we agree that this is occurring. And frankly, if our engineering department isn't aware of comprehensive plan policies and transportation system policies and designing our transportation system in alignment with, then that we have a bigger problem.
Well,
I think fortunately that's not the case.
Well, or if that situation does, this actually rectifies it.
Sure, yeah.
Or helps rectify it.
So it sounds like we're all ready to move forward with this kind of in alignment with Commissioner Edge's recommendations. Maybe head nods, thumbs up. Yeah, great.
If I could, Chair, my comments were based on, I'm fine with that recommendation. My comments were based on trying to arrive at concrete language about being consistent with a comp plan.
Yeah.
If you propose language like that, the city engineer is going to have three different balls in the air and not the tools necessary to divine the path through that.
Yeah.
So consideration, I think, is a much better term when we look at things as, you've got larger policy issues addressed by the comp plan, and then we weed down into more specific things. And I think the stuff within the purview, as Commissioner Hemer points out, of the city engineer is very detailed as opposed to more heightened policy issues. So.
Consideration, I worry about some of that wiggle room though, because I think,
Again, this is your recommendation.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah, no,
I
that's,
don't believe we have comprehensive policies at the granular level of the engineering, city engineers. Look, I'm scoping through the comp plan right now, looking for access standard policies, and I don't know that we have a significant amount of them.
Well, and then one thing to keep in mind, Justin, is that we haven't updated the transportation chapter of the comp plan since the recent adoption, and so that's forthcoming. There could be access standards or access related policies there when it's all said and done. I think that again, what I'm thinking of is like the very first thing, the most obvious thing that comes to mind is that there are special street setback standards for like Harmony Road, right? And so the code calls out some streets and says, hey, we have we do something very unique and special for this street. Now I realize that the setback standard is completely different than, what we're talking about with access, standards or, whatever, but there's and in the abstract, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that there's a policy level, in a regulatory level, implementation of that policy that says, hey, we're going to make sure that buildings are certain ways back from Harmony Road and other, certain particular streets. We don't want someone to come in and have the authority to allow someone to build a structure within that setback. We don't want that policy to be overruled because someone had the discretion to do it and wasn't required to consider these other policies or regulations that were in play for that unique case. And so that's really what I'm getting at, is it's like, I realize that we're normally talking about really high level stuff with the policies. Sometimes they get very, laser specific on something, and we don't want to lose track of those in these case by case reviews.
great. Well, let's move on to MCC 19.201, which is our Plex development definitions. Any discussion on this that anyone wants to dig in on?
I just want to say I really like this one because it actually resolves my conflict with the attached in the cluster. So if we just, instead of just calling it this middle housing, and that we actually define Plex development, just as long as my worry is that we're going to put in Plex development and then we're going to forget how to add and subtract things into each section, right? Which may cause more house amending rules, but I think we'll eventually get there. So I like it. I like it personally.
Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Great. Residential zones, townhouses on corner lots. This is one I think makes a lot of sense as well. And, as we talked about in our work session, I think we need to think about corner lots more broadly because, I think this is going to help, but it's not going to solve the problem. And corner lots, I think, are a little bit of a unique beast. So, I think I'm definitely supportive of this. Where are others?
Yeah, I am too, for the simple reason is that it maintains the front lot streetscape to that side. I mean, that's the whole issue, right? That for the beauty of the street, which is subjective, I guess, that you have a continuous front yard kind of deal. that resolves at least that one issue. It may not resolve all of them, but it certainly resolves the one and makes sense to me.
Anyone else want to bite at this apple? No?
Come on, Commissioner Carpenter. I know you want to jump in there.
I just want to clarify something really quick. Is this it says the minimum lot size. Is this the minimum lot size or the maximum lot size?
It affects the maximum lot size.
Okay,
We're proposing to increase the maximum lot size for a townhouse on a corner lot.
Okay, so that's what I thought, but the staff report says a minimum lot size.
Sorry.
And so I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same standard here. That's all. So yeah, with respect to the maximum lot size for townhouses on corner lots, totally cool with this. Thank you.
I do want to just maybe walk through and reiterate the point that we are addressing what the original issue was, is that developers were not able to develop a particular site for townhouse development with underlying lots as they stood because of this minimum lot size requirement or maximum lot size requirement. Because it essentially the corner lot is undevelopable based on existing requirements or standards, correct?
Correct. Absent a type 3 variance to something.
And so does this amendment address that or fix that issue?
In part, I think.
Because it would be an easier application for a developer to do a townhouse development, let's say with 8 townhomes on a lot that has 8 underlying lots. However, the corner lot doesn't meet that standard. It throws off the entire calculation.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so they would have to it would still result in 7 units instead of 8. So I don't see how this fixes anything.
That's a fair point. And I mean, I think that's where I think maybe the bigger issue is the side yard setback for these corner lots. I think, when you have that structure on that corner lot, and you've got a setback for the front yard as one and a different setback for the side yard as another, it just seems problematic. So, I don't know if it's really, I don't know if it's a topic worth getting into in this Housekeeping Plus iteration or if it's a future one, but.
And this is maybe to amend the record, but I do apologize to Commissioner Edge. In our last meeting, I think I cut off the discussion because I think you were onto something regarding side yard setbacks, but I would defer to Chairman Sherman on this to see if this is the appropriate platform to discuss this. But
I think I would probably recommend, rather than trying to come up with new code amendments kind of on the fly, and instead maybe we make we figure out if we're okay with this as is, and then maybe attach a recommendation for council to say, and look, we want you to look at the side yard setback piece too. It sounds like there's some time between our session today and when this gets to council. And so maybe staff, as part of that work session, could dig into that topic a little bit more specifically if that's what the commission is interested in recommending forward. Where do others stand? Yeah, please, Commissioner Edge.
Thank you. So what I'm thinking is this fix, if you want to call it a fix, the fix provides a clear and objective way to move forward without a variance. And so this gives someone the option of doing, it's like, here's what you can do to comply with the criteria, and it'll be a pretty easy, it'll be a pretty easy review. That you'll get your approvals. But if you wanted that 8th lot, you wanted to build out that 8th structure and get closer than 35 feet, get closer than 15 feet on the side, on the corner, that's a variance. So then you come in and you have the type 3 variance, and you get to, kind of argue before the planning commission how, how you're going to be able to comply with the policies for like, interfacing with the public realm, and things like that, when you have, the side of your building is fronting a street and actually quite close to it, and out of sorts with perhaps out of sorts with the other blocks, and other buildings on that block. And so, I think that's a good opportunity for a variance, because you come in and you say, hey, this is why this is going to be better the way I'm proposing it to get this eighth unit, per the example given. And then if, again, the clear and objective path, which is you stay 15 feet off and you have that 3,500 foot, square foot lot, on the corner, that ensures, like Commissioner Hemer was saying, that that frontage side, but that street frontage, the interface with that building is similar to how it would be if the building were facing that street. And so that, again, is kind of, public realm, policy. And so, anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we were kind of thinking about that, because, this, I think is, I agree. I want to have more of a discussion about what the public realm interface should look like. And when you have a building that's the side of it is facing a street, what can you do with that side yard to make it to where you could perhaps use more of it, get a little bit closer to the street, but still meet, the public realm goals. I think that there's a lot of discussion to have there. This is not the place, this is not the forum for that discussion. And I don't think that this particular code amendment process is either. But we could certainly punt to, city council to have that discussion in a work session. But I just wanted to kind of recenter us on the idea that, that we're really proposing here the clear and objective track, and allowing, some of this to go through without having to come in for, for variances or things, or, to the maximum, lot size and all of that. So anyway, I think this does what we wanted to do for Housekeeping Plus. And then there's a bigger discussion to have that's not really part of this. So that's why I'm supportive of the as proposed.
Great. Thanks.
It's like yes, but or yes plus.
Yeah. Vera or Adam, can you remind me, what is the front yard setback?
The front yard setback is 20 feet.
20 feet?
Street side yard is 15.
It's 15.
Generally in
Generally,
the RMD.
yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Anyone else have anything on this? No, nothing.
I do have a question, and this is for our attorney. Is there anything that state law, is there an issue with, let's say there are 8 underlying lots, but based on our city's standards that limits development on one lot, that limits development on that lot, that maybe is in conflict with state law for, I don't know if I'm phrasing this correctly or not, clearly not.
Not understanding.
So let's say it's one parcel, 8 underlying lots, 7 of the lots can comply with our city's development standards. The corner lot, the 8th lot, is not in compliance based for development based on our code. Does that run into conflict with the state requirement or state laws allowing that parcel to exist, but it's undevelopable based on our local jurisdiction? Is there something that can come back to us saying, sorry, state allows us to have this is a legal lot of record and I can develop it? Or
What would be the situation that would render that lot undevelopable? I mean,
if
it's a lot of record and it has access, which to be a lot of record, it needs to have an access point.
So if that building doesn't meet the setback standards would be one example.
Right, may I think
Please.
if we have a series of 25 by 100 underlying lots, so the corner lot is 25 by 100 feet, but we have a street side yard setback of 15 feet, which means, and we have a side yard setback of 5 if they are unattached, so you effectively cannot develop that underlying lot based on our development standards. And I think the question is, are we able to, is it okay to have regulations such that that underlying lot is effectively undevelopable because of our development standards? I guess. And I was not aware that a lot had to be, I mean, you still have to apply the development standards to a lot. But I don't know all of the ins and outs of.
And the bigger ask is making sure that what we're proposing here doesn't put us into further conflict with that state requirement. So that's.
We'll have to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah. Okay.
have an answer off the top of my head that,
And I think the overarching
yeah.
answer is, I don't know if that's the.
I think it's outside the scope.
Yeah, I don't know that that
Plus, yeah. Yeah. And I think that with this, based on kind of what we're hearing, or what I'm hearing from others, I think we can probably let this one move forward kind of as is. Do hope we can, find a way to harmonize those setback requirements for those corner lots in particular. To me, it seems funny. I wish it was actually funny that, depending on what side you orient the front door, you have different spacing requirements for the front or the side. It just doesn't seem to really make a lot of sense. And it seems with our housekeeping, so much of what we're trying to do is harmonize and create consistency. And this is an inconsistency that's not getting resolved. And that's probably why you're hearing my thoughts there. But we can move on to our next piece on the North Milwaukie Innovation Area. And I think I wanted to maybe even ask just procedurally for a motion to move forward tonight. Are we actually, as part of that motion, striking the commercial mixed use zones, height bonuses in GMU? Like, is there a code?
The code doesn't have it in there.
Doesn't have it, great.
Right,
So
yeah.
we'll just move over it topically, knowing that it's not moving forward. So where are folks standing on MCC 19.312.7? Commissioner Hemer, you told me that you had some thoughts or questions on this.
No, I was all the way down the list.
Oh, you were.
But I believe this was Commissioner Carpenter's discussion, and it has to work with Wilsonville, the plantings, the building, that they require all this building development and then a bunch of landscape in front of it anyways, right?
Not just Wilsonville, but yes.
Right. Does this resolve your issue?
It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like this is almost no holds barred. Anything outside of 50 feet development standard wise kind of goes. Is that?
Correct, that's correct. If I can, for clarification purposes, the design standards only apply to development on key streets that are identified in the NMIA. It's not all of them. So it's the identified key streets. And then if you're on a key street, if you're beyond 50 feet from that street, then the specific glazing standards and materials and all of that would not apply. That's the proposal. Yeah.
That's a helpful clarification. I do want to paint the picture though that it would be from a key street, parking aisle, drive aisle, parking, and then the building would essentially be 50 feet to help paint that picture for everyone, what that would look like beyond what that code would cover.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Commissioner Carpenter. I think that I was gnawing at the question and I didn't ask it, but, there's probably a fundamental difference between new construction in the NMIA and existing buildings. And in a new construction environment, or major renovations, which is probably where this applies, like where does the rest of code work in terms of, would we even see buildings 50 feet, further than 50 feet back? Or do we have other code that would say, no, we want that building closer to the street? And so, the one situation I think that's in most of our minds was a few hearings ago, building was back 100 feet. Right. It was built 100 years ago, right? So that's like what we're thinking about. But what would a new building even be? Would it be captured by the being within 50 feet? Or as Commissioner Carpenter is pointing out, maybe there's a parking lot buffering things and other things, and suddenly these design standards don't apply.
In the NMIA, we have some, sorry,
Sorry, I should have asked
I'm double checking
earlier.
the code, so yeah. In certain places, we do have maximum front yard setbacks because we are trying to establish that streetscape.
Relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
So this code amendment is intended to, if there are additions, you're right. So new construction on a new site, kind of idea, they are going to be closer up. Okay. So they will have to meet. This was trying to kind of suss out some of this existing development with additions and so on, and trying not to have all of those things.
So instead of calling it new construction, why can't we call it additions?
That's part of, it's in the applicability of the design standards are part of new construction, additions, major renovations, that's all in the code. Right, so yeah, new construction, major exterior alterations are kind of the way we've written it. But we're trying to suss out that applicability and creating that additional space.
That helps me a lot.
Okay,
So thank you.
great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any other discussion or deliberation on this, or are we ready to straw poll, move forward with it? All right. Fantastic. Our supplementary development regulations, 19,500, front porches. Oh, not front porches. This is our rear porches, to be treated the same as front porches. Thumbs up.
Well, this seems like to me that maybe we need backyard porches language and not tie it into the front porch. Because a back porch is certainly different than a front porch and the way that we use it in our lives. And so it seems to me that we're tying it into this front porch just to make it easy to tie it into the front porch. But it seems like that maybe we should just set up new back porch standards.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think we should be treating our back porches more like our front porches. And
Well, I understand why you say that, and when it came out of my mouth, I hang out in my front yard in my underwear as much as anybody else does, but we certainly use our back porches as living spaces nowadays, and so it just seems to me that because we threw out all these scenarios during the questioning of, wow, what is enclosed and what does a railing mean? And I mean, why don't we just modernize our back porch standards and allow it to be 10 feet off of the porch or within 5 feet of the setback?
So let me ask you maybe the pointed question then is, do you have a fundamental problem with the proposal here that would preclude you from supporting it moving forward? I understand the broader question.
Right, because I don't think that it really solves the issue that we're trying to address.
I think staff thinks it probably does.
I know it does, but I think it's going to cause more problems than it does actually cause solutions. Because what's going to happen is that the next planning director is going to say, well, it has to be totally open because it says can't be enclosed. And the next planning director is going to say, well, it's got one wall in it, but it's still open on 3 facing sides. I think there's some ambiguity there.
The wall, I mean, I think this is less though about the wall issue than it is about spacing and setbacks. And, you know, I'd like to remind ourselves as a commission, we've had a few, you know, homeowners in front of us spending their time, and we all heard their plight and happily nodded our heads yes. So
No.
why charge them $3,000?
No. I agree with you 100%. So here, I will put my check mark and say this is okay, but I really think that in the future that we should actually look at back deck standards as a standalone instead of tying it in with the front porch, because it seems like a real goofy way to get around this, in my estimation.
Or it's more complicated regulations.
Yeah, but they're going to do it anyways, because what happens is somebody's going to say, hey, I want to build a back deck, and they're going to say, well, look at the front porch standards.
Commissioner Carpenter?
I just don't read this as tying it directly with front porch requirements, but
It's okay.
Where, Vice Chair Freeman, Commissioner Edge, are you both fine to move forward with this? Yep. All right. Getting to more exciting topics. Metal siding are type B accessory structures. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. All right. Building design standards, cottage cluster housing, 3 attached cottages, and then number of attached cottages in the RHD to 4. This is one I think you heard me ask some questions and would just welcome a little bit of dialogue on this. I think I'm just a little confused by how we're counting all the different things, and that maybe again it's just been a long day. But I think the bigger underlying issue or concern that I have is are we creating an incentive for cottage cluster development in a way that and this is, I guess, with the RHD specifically, that incentivizes cottage clusters over kind of multi-unit development. And like and I don't know if we can answer that question. I think it is a theoretical question, but.
The actual answer to your question is that you're actually, by doing this, as far as I'm concerned, you're actually prioritizing or you're encouraging more cottage clusters than you are multifamily or triplexes and quadplexes.
Sure, and I think there's an underlying question and concern of, thinking about a physical site, and if, we're saying on the RHD you can have 4 attached clusters, and that's what you get, 12 units, versus here's my site, I'm going to build one structure with, let's just say, 50 units. I understand we're creating options for the development community, which is probably a positive thing, but is those 12 units that might be tilted more towards home ownership, are those more important than the 50 units in a multi-unit development that might be more? Please, Vera, sorry.
The only clarification I wanted to provide is that the code already allowed attached cottages in the RHD. This change puts a number on it. So when we passed the middle housing code, we already allowed attached.
Okay.
I'm not trying to argue or dissuade you.
No, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that we already allowed attached cottages. We didn't say how many.
Okay.
And when we were looking at this, realized we really need to say how
Sure.
many because it doesn't
Clearly,
say.
yeah.
So That's why we landed on 4.
Thanks.
And that's the only change
That's
in the
the change we're
RHD.
making. Great.
In the RHD, that's the only
That's
change.
okay.
Yes.
Adam?
Yeah, when we were talking about the high density zones and we did the consolidation, there was a recognition that middle housing can currently be constructed at higher densities than are allowed in the RHD or the HDR. I don't know if we've quite changed it to RHD. Okay, so now it's RHD. If you were building a quadplex on 3,000 square foot lots, you would end up with 50 something probably units per acre, and the maximum in the RHD is 32 currently. So there is already that conflict with middle housing, regardless
great.
of the.
Well, I appreciate focus on the number, not that larger question. So I think
The real answer is economics in the long run anyways. And so it depends on how many units that they think they're going to either be able to sell, or how much units they'd rather develop to rent, or does a rental building have more value to be able to sell? And then tie that in with some parking and a whole bunch of EV conduit, then you got it all figured out.
You mean flying cars?
Flying cars.
I know that, I think Commissioner Edge would like to get in, and Commissioner Carpenter as well, but Commissioner Edge will take you first.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to reality for a second. So really what we're talking about here is this is a technical clarification, and all it is says we can already allow clusters. We can already allow in a cottage cluster that each of the dwellings, each unit in the cluster, some of them can be attached to each other. And in RHD, we didn't put a cap on that. And once you hit 5 units attached to each other, not on a lot, but attached to each other, it's multifamily. It's an apartment building. And so by capping it at 4, we're saying we will never have that conflict. We won't have to apply multifamily standards to a cottage, to a cottage cluster development. And it's about how many units are touching each other, not how many units are on the lot. So then, anyway, I super appreciate you bringing up the point about density here, because we already have in our housing production strategies, which we have our last meeting on Thursday for the housing capacity, technical advisory committee. We are, one of the recommendations is to revisit, RHD and, how our RHD performs. And one of my concerns from the very beginning of the middle housing code hearings was, should we be allowing such low density uses in high density residential zones? The answer is undoubtedly no, but we're not there yet. We actually have to go through the process to get, and to have the justification, to make such a drastic change to our code. That's forthcoming. And, and one of our housing production strategies is in fact to make RHD perform better and to increase the average density of, the built density of the RHD zones. So I think that some of our concerns about this will be addressed. This is not the right venue to address those kinds of questions. So as proposed, I think that this does the cleanup. This does what we want it to do. It allows in the RMD where we want cottage clusters to be built. It allows a couple of those, 2 or 3 of those to be attached. And that's more efficient. That's totally cool. They still have to be oriented to the green. They still have to be connected on the pathway. All the other standards still apply. And so this is a common sense change. It's a really nuanced, surgical change. I think we should be cool with it for now. And we'll get our chance to really talk about what our high density zones should be doing. That will be forthcoming.
Thanks, Commissioner Edge. I appreciate that. Anything, Commissioner Carpenter?
I completely agree with Commissioner Edge. I do want to clarify with staff and just make sure and reiterate the point that this doesn't affect the possibility of a developer to subdivide per unit if they are attached in an RMD versus and still meet the development standards.
The way I would respond to that, though, is that the Middle Housing Land Division statute would allow for land division of the cottages themselves so that they could be on their own lot. But, and that can be done whether they're attached or detached. That's for plexes as well. So there's no difference there.
Again, it goes back to making sure we're not putting ourselves into a
Correct.
conflict. Okay,
Yes,
great.
yeah, and no, we would not be.
Great. And the only thing I'd say, I'm the one that raised or concerned about this because of triplexes and quadplexes, and it seems like that it kind of skirts the rules, but I'm fine now that we've defined plexes by itself into our definition, that this helps me resolve that issue.
Well, why don't we move on to Commissioner Hemer's favorite topic, electric cars and electric car charging. How are folks on 19600? Good. Thumbs up, Commissioner Edge. Nods from Vice Chair Freeman. Thumbs up in the room. All right, great. Well, we have maybe saved the bestest for lastest, as I said earlier. The conditional use is MCC 19905. Vice Chair Freeman, I would invite you to maybe open the discussion on this, because I think you probably have the most for us to hear from.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try to keep it brief. I'm not quite sure why we have this provision in. I don't think it's necessary. When the topic was brought up, bringing this provision, one of the reasons I heard was to be a good neighbor. Fences make good neighbors. I don't think that's true, but the code isn't here to make good neighbors. If that was the case, we'd be bringing everybody cookies like you said you brought to your neighbors. So I don't think that's a good valid reason to have this provision in. Another reason I heard was people might be having large parties in the back, or people having parties in the back and having, setting up by the pit and making a lot of noise. I don't think a fence or tall bushes reduces any noises at all. I don't think that they're not going to stop the noise from going over. So I don't think that helps at all. Another reason I heard was for privacy. I don't think rental property makes any difference from a regular neighborhood house. So I know in flag lots, they put up these things, but the proximity is closer. Residential in these type of vacation homes, the space is still the same as any other residential house. So there's no need to put in these extra layers of privacy. And I don't think they really provide any privacy. So I would say that these provisions are not necessary. Also, I haven't heard any information about several reports to police because there's too much noise at these properties, that there's peeping toms if we're worried about privacy and anything like that. I haven't heard anything about, people calling to the city other than police, like co-fires or whoever, about too much noise. It seems to me that we're putting in a provision that's not necessary. As I step back and I think about this provision, on its face, you say, oh, we want to put in privacy. But to me, it's not an issue of privacy. It's an issue of, the city, the residents of the city have decided that these type of properties are allowable inside our city. There are some people who don't want them there. They don't want the vacationers there. And this is a way of saying, well, we can't stop you from having vacation homes, but we shouldn't have to look at you. So we're going to put up fences. We can't stop you from being here. We can't stop these properties from being here. So I'm going to put up a fence so I don't have to look at you. And that's just not okay with me. That feels exclusionary. I read an article a couple weeks ago about a college in Baltimore where it's a HBCU and it's been around since the early 1900s. It was placed in a neighborhood, predominantly white neighborhood. And one of the things that the white residents did to block off the students at the HBCU was to put up a spike wall. And I see parallels between this provision and this spike wall. I don't think it's racially motivated, but I think it's you don't belong here. You're not a part of from here. And we're going to put this wall so we don't have to look at you. And I just don't think that's okay. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Vice Chair Freeman. I appreciate that.
I'm willing to rebut that.
I'll hold for a second and just see if Commissioner Edge, Commissioner Carpenter has anything to add first.
Yeah. I mean, I do. Generally speaking, I concur, with what Vice Chair Freeman just said, and I appreciate his perspective. And I thank you for bringing all of that up. I have different arguments about fences as well, but ultimately what this comes down to is when you have a conditional use, you're saying that, okay, well, here's some use that might create some additional kind of impacts on the zone that maybe the zone wasn't intended for, and so we want you to mitigate those impacts. And the best example is an institutional use like a school. Being in a low or moderate density residential neighborhood, you want it to fit in and kind of, still feel like a neighborhood, even though that there's this institutional use there that's doing something completely different than with the land. A vacation rental is not significantly or substantially distinct from people living in a house, with the exception that there are probably significant numbers of days where that house is empty of any people at all, which reduces the impact on the neighbors, quite frankly, and makes it a lower impact use, than the surrounding uses in the zone. So I don't really see a need to mitigate this in the way that this is suggesting. I mean, this kind of physical make an investment mitigation is overkill for the kind of impact we're talking about. And I generally also concur with Vice Chair Freeman's assessment that, these aren't necessarily going to mitigate much noise, in the first place. So I know it's not nothing, but it's also not like going to mitigate all of the noise from having a loud party next door. So, what we've factored in so far with our conditional use process, the criteria for a vacation rental, we consider different things, and one of those things is that the operator, the owner, has to have basically a good neighbor policy, and they have to post contact information, after hours contact information. They have to all of this stuff that they have to the rules, the house rules that they have to post and make sure that their renters are agreeing to. So we're already doing the things to try to mitigate the reasonable impacts of these uses. And I think that what we're asking to do with these screening requirements is to mitigate the unreasonable impacts of some of these uses. And I'm not okay with that being code, not for everybody to have to I don't think that you have to justify why you don't need to build a fence to mitigate noise. I think that you just need, we need, if this is what we want to allow to happen in our communities, and then we need the code enforcement to do its part when an operator is not doing their part. But I don't think that we need to require this investment on this in site improvements for this kind of use.
Thanks, Commissioner Edge. I will hand it over, I think, Commissioner Hemer for some perspective from you.
So I think what we are doing, and I appreciate Vice Chair Freeman's comments and Commissioner Edge's comments. But But I think what you are missing the point is that this is a commercial operation inside a residential neighborhood. This is the only time that we allow a commercial operation with as many trips generated into a residential neighborhood. It is not about how we want to make the vacationers feel. It is about the residents that live there and their availability to privacy. Now, you could call it an unburdened tax or whatever, but they are using this thing as a moneymaker. They're not using it for any other reason but as a moneymaker. So it's not really a tax. It's not a burden. It's more of a burden on the residents that have to surround this property when an issue comes up because now they want to build more privacy. We don't even talk about dogs. We don't even talk about issues with wandering children. We don't even talk about the safety reasons why a vacation house should have this area. But really, it's more about eliminating the mitigation of the impacts that it has on the current established neighborhood than it does as being a burden on the vacationers. I understand that maybe fences don't build the best neighbors in the world, but I can truly tell you that fences help mitigate the noise. They provide a barrier so other people aren't wandering over into other people's yards. That stuff is not, because it's not about all of the people that rent these vacation homes, but it only takes one. It only takes one. And we've seen throughout all of these is that everybody has generally built a privacy fence around their property. It seems very natural to do in this sort of situation. And I understand that you have feelings about making them feel ostracized because they're renting a vacation. But I tell you what, it's the other people that already live there, that are already established, that end up paying the price. It is not a tax. It is not a burden. This place is a place of profit. It's a commercial business, and it's sitting there for the only reason that no other business can be here, for the amount of trips that are generated and the amount of people that you will see on that property, is so that we can have an opportunity for a hotel. So for that case, for the privacy of not the people that are renting the place, but for the people that live around that place, just some screening, man. It's some arborvitae. It's a 6-foot fence. It's nothing. And all it does is will make it a better place. Somebody has a dog or a kid that wanders off, and it will make it a safer place for everybody.
Thanks, Commissioner Humer. Commissioner Carpenter, any thoughts on this issue in particular?
Only that I think the provisions that are already in place regarding mitigation of impacts to neighbors already include limits on parking. So trip generation isn't necessarily going to
it does, because you're going to have different multiple trips from day to day to day. I'm sorry.
Again, I don't know if that's elevated based on what a normal residential use would be. Also, noise mitigation is covered with decibel readers, and whether or not that's going to be covered by, a fence.
We don't
or
have
not.
a requirement for a decibel reader.
We do, I believe.
I don't think so, no.
No.
The last application before us
Putting them in.
brought it in.
Oh, that
as
wasn't
part of their business
I thought
choice.
that was part
there
of
are
our-
no decimal meters.
Yeah.
based on our code enforcement.
Yeah, the only mitigation that you have is that 10 p.m. is basically a noise ordinance once you get above that.
Well, okay. So that's the noise mitigation is typical of residential use, and if it goes past that, that's enforceable by what we have already, correct? I don't see how a fence adds to or detracts from noise mitigation. I'm there with Vice Chair Freeman and Commissioner Edge on, I don't see how this adds to mitigating issues of having this as a use in a residential zone. I don't see this as the other side of it is a home occupation. You're running a business out of your home. That's a commercial use. Not to open that can of worms. You can have clients come in and out. That's an additional, right? So if we open it to that, that's another discussion. And I don't see this as any different than a normal use, residential use in a residential land use. So to add screening as a requirement outside of what's already required, I haven't seen that threshold in my opinion, but.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Carpenter. Appreciate the discussion on this. I think that I feel like I really truly can see both sides of the coin on this. The past two applications that we've had in front of the Planning Commission for vacation rentals, a number of community members have come, I think, frustrated with the general overall policy choice that the city made, and wanting to understand how it applies to them. And then two, looking for some way to mitigate real or perceived impacts. I think at the two that I can think of, I think our existing code is actually vague enough that if we had a savvy enough community member make an articulate argument on privacy or on safety, we could find ourselves requiring a fence. Nobody's done that yet. But I know that if I was sitting over there, I could probably convince all of us to do that. So, I think that's that's in and of itself is, I think, a problem. I think that as somebody who has used my home, my residence as a short-term vacation rental, understand the relationship to my neighbors, talk to my neighbors, made sure all my neighbors had everybody's contact information when that was happening in case any issues came up. Also have a fully fenced yard. So that wasn't a question or a concern, in terms of, I understand, I think both the impact to the property owner in terms of, as Commissioner Freeman mentioned, site investments. Needing to fence your yard is a several $1,000 endeavor. And also know from the business side of things, that's a tax write-off. So, there's both a push-pull there as well. Personally, I also live a few homes away from a vacation rental, and I think it is somewhat different than your standard residential dwelling. New people come in, new cars show up, everybody's generally great. But it's different people kind of all the time. And frankly, it is also vacant many times as well. So, but I do think it's different. I think everybody around us knows that it's a little bit different. I think where I'm kind of landing on this is, especially after hearing from others, and again, Vice Chair Freeman, I appreciate a lot of what you also had to share, is I think I would feel most comfortable pulling this out from this package and asking staff and council to bring it into their work session. So not moving it forward as a recommendation from our body, but bringing it forward as a topic for council deliberation. This, in my opinion, is, as we've spent time on this together, this is bigger than Housekeeping Plus, right? Like, we're having what feels like a pretty substantive policy conversation on something as simple as a fence. But it's not that simple. And in some ways, I think that this is a conversation, as we've said to community members who've come here, if you're unhappy with this, please go talk to your elected officials. I think this is council's choice to make, not ours. I think we should take no position on it, and we should move forward with making a recommendation for the changes to Title 12, as we discussed previously, moving the rest of the recommended changes for Title 12, move the rest of the package forward, and take this as like a tabled conversation for council to pick up and make a decision on, because I just don't think I don't think it's fully our role, honestly, but I also think it needs to be answered, because we're going to get more applications in front of us. And if, like I said, a savvy enough person's going to be able to make a privacy or safety concern. And it would be nice if we had a real clear and objective path forward. So that's my proposal. I hope the rest of the commission will agree with me on that, and would maybe open it up for any final conversation on this.
I believe the standards that everybody that has come in with a vacation rental, we have either asked them to put in some privacy fencing, or they have already said that they were going to do it.
Yeah.
This is not out of the norm. This is really a standard, just trying to quantify it. But if we feel different, I have been shut down 9,001 times in my 9 years of being on this commission. I'll be shut down again. I'm fine with it.
I just don't know if 2 cases makes a standard, Commissioner Hemer.
I believe we've had 5 or 6,
Well,
and I believe all of them
Yeah.
have come in with that exact same proposal, or we have required it.
I can only think of 2 within the last year, but point taken. And again, I think I see both sides, and I think that's why I would like, Mayor Beatty, councilors to pick this up, because I don't know, I think it's a simple, but it's also a hot button issue, and I think it's above our volunteer pay grade.
Fine, kick the can down the road.
Regardless of how it ends up at council, they're going to,
Right.
so
Great
it
point,
doesn't
Justin.
matter if,
Yeah. Great.
I would support that we have clear and objection goals or standards for how these are treated. And if we can say yes or no up front that fences are required versus we decide it at a public hearing, that would be great. So I support this going to council for the ultimate decision.
Great.
So, hold on.
But I don't want to make that into a motion. Sorry.
Yeah.
Wait.
I don't want to close discussion. Sorry.
Because I'm willing to make a motion. Are you supporting Chair Sherman's suggestion that we scratch the conditional use part of this on the update, that we go back to the traditional Title 12 with our recommendations with the changes that are in by crossing off the CMU zones and the suggested changes that we put together in the access management?
And to be clear, my proposal was exactly that we move the package forward with an added recommendation on the Title 12, that we make sure the policies are part of the criteria in decision making, but that with this conditional use, we are neither recommending nor opposing it, that we're just taking it as a topic for council. And I think that's probably a good compromise position, Commissioner Hemer, because I think in counting the votes, there's probably enough votes to strike it from the recommendation forward to council.
I would agree with Commissioner Huber and the point where he said, let's not kick it down the
Great.
line. I'd say we vote on the issue
Great.
present.
Thank you. Thanks, Vice Chair Freeman. Well, let's do that then. And let's just take a straw poll vote then on the conditional use itself and see where things land. So folks in favor of keeping it as is, who would those people be? Commissioner Hemer, I'll count one.
Oh,
On the conditional use.
Leaving it into this-
Leaving it in to require fences.
yes, I would vote yes for that package.
I'm only hearing one. Those who would oppose that? See 2, 3, and then I frankly might be abstaining on that, but the nays would carry that.
I would also not,
I don't
original
think you'll be
suggestion-
changing my position. on
well,
that.
but your original position was not to include it into the recommendation of the package, but to carry it forward to the work session and let city council work it out.
Yeah, but I think I agree with Commissioner or Vice Chair Freeman. We should just rip the Band-Aid off now and let it happen.
All right.
So.
Well,
All right.
just like Justin said, this is going to go forward and be put in front of city council anyway. And staff will just tell them that, the planning commission recommended that we remove this from the package of amendments, but it's still going to be there for them to look at and talk about and decide if they want to overrule us. So
No, it won't. If I was planning staff, I would cross off the ones that we did not include and just say, this is the package that we have forward.
Well, I think just like staff did with us on the GMU height, like that was, in a presentation today, it was said, this is bigger than code housekeeping plus, but so we're taking it off. But we're still talking
It's
about
fine.
it.
Somebody just make the motion.
All right. Sounds like we have a sense of the shape of the motion. Could I get a motion for?
I'll give it a shot. Let's see. I move that we recommend approval of the package of amendments for ZA-2023-002 as proposed by staff, except that we recommend for the access management Title 12 that we would like to have, that we recommend the addition of a criteria for review that it considers the adopted comprehensive plan, goals and policies, transportation system plan policies, and in those of any other adopted plans. And that we do not recommend number 9, the conditional uses for the vacation rental screening.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Edge. We have a motion on the floor.
I'll second the motion, Chair.
The motion has been seconded. Any further discussion on the motion?
Before
yes,
you vote,
please.
I'm looking at Vera. Did we get it all?
Got it all.
All right.
Got it all.
There we go.
Thank you.
Wait, are we going to include eliminating that one number that we eliminated, or is that just eliminated from the package?
Commissioner Edge, proposed eliminating it from the package.
Okay.
Motion's been seconded. Any other?
Eliminating the mixed use.
That was already.
It was already out.
Okay.
Eliminated,
All right.
yeah. Thank you. All right, the motion, no further discussion. Let's take a vote. All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
One nay. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. The ayes have it 4-1. Thank you all for the robust discussion on this. I think when we all looked at the agenda tonight, we didn't think we'd still be here at 9 o'clock tonight. So this decision is a recommendation to the Milwaukie City Council, which will make a final decision after a public hearing. Please see planning staff for details concerning the city council hearing date and process. Can we take a 5? Let's just do a quick 5. Quick
You're the chair.
5-minute break. Folks can use the restroom, grab some water, and we'll reconvene at 9:05, keeping in mind that clock is fast.
Right? I was just gonna
We'll be back
wonder how
on
you
in
figured
5.
that one out.
Call it 9:06.
Yeah, 9:06.
Yeah.
I don't think that.
Yeah.
Welcome back to your regularly scheduled episode of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. I'm going to hand it over to staff for our work session item on the Neighborhood Hubs project. Associate Planner Adam Haru and Senior Planner Vera Colias will be presenting information on this project for our discussion.
Thanks very much, everyone. I'm going to share my screen, and Adam's going to be taking the lead on the presentation, but we wanted to, since we had time on the agenda, wanted to come in and give you an update on the Neighborhood Hubs project, where we are, some comments about our process so far, what we expect to be doing, and just get the commission up to speed and see if you have any questions about the approach. So let me screen. Okay.
All right, so we are in full swing in we're calling phase 2 of the Neighborhood Hubs project. So Neighborhood Hubs are gathering places where residents have easy access to goods and services close to their homes. They're also places where neighbors create meaningful relationships with one another. A little bit of project history for everyone. So Milwaukie community members created the vision for Neighborhood Hubs during the city's 2017 Community Vision and Action Planning process, which engaged over 1,000 community members. And in 2018 and 2019, the city did some follow-up engagement through the neighborhood district associations, community events, and an online community survey. You can see some of the statistics here. That outreach showed a high level of community support for the project. About 85% of folks who answered those questions supported the Hubs concept. Since then, the city's explored some strategies to make this community vision a reality, ultimately incorporating the Neighborhood Hubs vision into the comprehensive plan in 2020, and staff have been working with a consultant team since then, or staff did work with a consultant team on a Neighborhood Hubs report in 2020 that has a framework for how hubs can grow over time and proposes some pathways forward. And we have been working with a new consultant to kind of work through phase 2 and seek to cover gaps in outreach and also explore implementation of these strategies that were identified in that 2020 report. Here you can see our sort of basic timeline. We've got it broken down into seasons, and we've made a lot of progress in sequencing a lot of those engagement events. There's some economic development program work and some work on refining the hubs, the types of hubs, the locations of the hubs, the boundaries of the hubs, as well as starting to develop into the summer some development code and ultimately adopting that code and potentially after that or during that, depending on economic development timeline, possibly creating some economic development programs, but those would likely be outside of the scope of the Planning Commission. And then also public engagement has been, it's started fairly recently, and we're moving forward. We shared some documents to that effect, and I'll go into a little more detail about the community engagement plans as we advance slides. So where could hubs be located? The city and the community engagement process has identified 13 locations across the city, and every neighborhood except for historic Milwaukie has hubs identified because it kind of functions as a hub or a collection of hubs already. And Island Station has 1 hub. Linwood and Hector Campbell each have 3 identified hubs, and then Llewellyn and Ardenwald have 2 each. So there's a decent spread of hubs across the city. These are the different types of hubs that have been identified, and this is something we're seeking to refine through the process that we're going through right now. Johnson Economics identified these in 2020. No 2 hubs are exactly alike in size, scale, nor their existing uses. And the future growth of each hub is really dependent upon a lot of different variables like economic conditions, zoning, the availability of land, and also community support. Property owners and business owners in particular are going to play a really important leading role in whether these hubs develop at all. Some hubs may not develop if there isn't that activity from property owners. And as the project progresses, we're going to, as I mentioned, refine these types of hubs to really better represent the state of the hubs that we have in the city now. And this somewhat implies a progression. this typology implies kind of a progression from opportunity site all the way up to, but we know that not every hub is going to follow that progression, and there's a good chance that we'll reduce the number of types of hubs through our engagement process and code refinement process. So here are some actions that the city can take. These were identified in the report completed in 2020. So while the city has, limited influence on how hubs will develop, these are some of the actions that the city can take to set hubs up for success, and also create opportunities for property and business owners to take action, and maybe actions they can't take now. So we're really seeking to build on and explore implementation of these particular strategies in the next phase of the project.
And 3 is crossed off there.
Yes.
Okay.
Number 3. So this is related to the ongoing climate-friendly, equitable communities rulemaking.
Great.
Has not totally eliminated the need for, there may be a hub that may currently potentially need to meet parking requirements, but generally speaking, the vast majority of the hubs no longer require parking with development because of that rulemaking process.
Great.
So we've got some equity considerations to share about the hubs project. One is gentrification and displacement. So when you increase access to desirable amenities, that increases livability, which has a good chance of increasing property values and rents for housing and commercial spaces. So to reduce the likelihood that gentrification leads to displacement, the city can design its economic development and planning strategies in a way that really directly benefits the residents and small businesses who are at risk of being pushed out as those changes take place. Also, the communities that we've engaged previously in this project, most of the outreach, or pretty much all of the outreach, happened prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and was really conducted through the neighborhood district association. So there's a lot of engagement there. Got a lot of really good ideas from community about what they want to see in hubs, but the city didn't really take many significant efforts to ensure that underrepresented communities were engaged in the project. And also demographic information was not collected as a part of that outreach. So we're a little bit uncertain about the diversity of that participation as well. And that includes, did we engage Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, people living with a disability, immigrant communities, low-income people, renters, having a bit of uncertainty with that and wanting to make sure that we connect with as many of those communities as possible as a part of this project. And then also hubs are not distributed currently equitably. They're not necessarily developed at the same levels across the hubs and in different neighborhoods. We can the next slide for a map to that effect. So you can see there are some pretty significant areas in the city where there's kind of no hub at all, or some gaps in between. You can't quite see it on this map, but there are about quarter-mile buffers around each of the hubs, and there are some areas where there's not a hub, so you could find yourself being in a little bit of a hub desert, so to speak. These 2 larger yellow circles with the 4 and the 12, those are really the highest developed, most active hubs that we have right now. And number 4 is where Safeway is on 42nd, and number 12 is King Road and Linwood. And so you've got that with the Wichita Town Center. So you've got kind of these 2 places that are much more developed than all the other hubs. And then you've got some lower intensity hubs that still have some activity, like the number 1 Ardenwall near Milwaukie Cafe and Bottle Shop. And then you've got Island Station on 22nd, and you've got Milwaukie Floral, which is number 7 on the map. And also the 7-Eleven down on Harmony, and Linwood is another one that's like somewhat developed. And a few of the others are really like small convenience stores that exist in residential neighborhoods. And I'll also mention some of them don't have much going on. They're just vacant sites or opportunities that maybe something could happen there. So our proposed approach has some focused community engagement on populations who either haven't been engaged or are going to play a really big role in making hubs possible, refining the types and locations of the hubs, doing some updates to the zoning and development code to facilitate hub growth and development. I mentioned before economic development programs. In the timeline, the placemaking piece was kind of missing, but economic development and placemaking programs, what are things that we can do for hubs at various stages of growth. And then also coordinating with other city projects. I know we mentioned the transportation system plan quite a bit tonight. Where are there opportunities to coordinate what we're trying to do with hubs with some of the other projects that really have an impact on hubs and vice versa? So one of the primary ways that we're going to engage folks this time around is working with property and business owners to explore what they're interested in doing with their properties. Are they interested in hubs-like activity? What kind of barriers are they facing? Things like that, to explore what kinds of possibilities we might be able to make happen, and what kind of code we might be able to change, et cetera. Also, the focused engagement I talked about with people of color, renters, immigrants, and folks with disabilities, as much as we can, trying to figure out how to build relationships and trust in some of those communities and bring them into the project and understand their needs. And then also exploring how neighborhood needs and neighborhood dynamics have changed since the COVID-19 pandemic. We know folks are spending a lot more time at home, for instance, doing a lot more working from home, maybe starting home businesses. So really trying to understand and integrate that into our approach. Some next steps, we've got a website up, got some basic information. There will be a survey going onto that website for outreach to property owners, business owners, and community organizations to understand how they want to plug in, what they might want to see out of the Hubs project, and then also a sort of concurrent process of doing a lot of code review and analysis and understanding what are some of the things that we can do to encourage hub growth and development, and really start to address those barriers.
If I could just jump in for a quick second. I think part of the outreach to property, business owners, and community organizations, we're starting that with a survey. We're sending out postcards and asking them to complete a survey, and then asking folks to opt in to more focused interviews or focus groups with us, so we can really kind of get into the details and understand what folks, what they have planned for their properties, what kinds of barriers, what kinds of ideas, what are the things that they would like to do but don't think they can, or, because that kind of information we can synthesize and start figuring out that against our code. We're doing a code audit, but we kind of need something to compare that to. And so understand what folks are looking to do out there as well.
If we, yeah, I was going to say, if we know property or business owners, and they ignore the postcard that you send them, can we just connect them with you as a way?
That would be wonderful. Yes.
Yes.
We know that, we're working with limited data sometimes when we're reaching out to folks. Business owners are a little bit easier to find because you know where their business is. You can knock on their door, but property owners especially, we're dealing with, addresses, sending a postcard. So any help connecting it would be huge for understanding their needs and actually getting an interview.
Well, does Planning Commission have questions regarding the city's approach for hubs? Commissioner Edge, you raised your digital hand really fast, so we'll start with you.
I did. So I'm totally excited about this project, and really I have been since I first heard about it. I think that this is a really cool way to to get us more to that 20-minute neighborhood model, where we can access things closer to home and without needing a car. So this is really excited about this. But what I'm wondering is it a better approach for us, with kind of where we are as a city, where the hubs are, kind of in their own development? Do we need to phase in zoning and development regulations for hubs so that we're not doing it all at once, or would it be better to do all of our hubs, kind of zoning and regulatory stuff all at once and apply it, to all of the hubs at the same time? What are we thinking in terms of rolling out, our regulations to the hubs?
Yeah, I think we're pretty early on, I would say, in the code review process. So we have Herbs Works, a consultant, working on they're at least beginning that work, but we don't have a ton of concrete information. I think also there are a lot of things on the menu, so to speak, that could be possible. We've talked about the home occupations code. Are there barriers for home-based businesses? And there's also questions about the mixed-use zones and some of the neighborhood commercial zones, and should there be some consolidation? And so there's just ideas floating about right now. We haven't quite gotten to the sequencing piece yet.
And I think to your question, Joseph, I think because many of the hubs are in varying stages of where they are, and not all of the hubs will be the Safeway shopping center necessarily. Some of them don't have the real estate for that. I mean, it just depends. So I think once we get a better sense from the survey, from the interviews, just trying to get a sense of where, or what are the goals for some of these hubs, and understanding kind of what's possible, or where what people want to have happen there, what's going on. I think then we'll be able to target what the development regulations might look like. I think some of them are fairly obvious and some of them aren't. And I think we need to suss out a bit more detail from what the feedback that we get to kind of have a sense of what's happening. So it won't be a one size fits all. I think there will be a couple of things. And we do have a lot of these little micro zones, the CN zone, the CL zone, that literally apply to the convenience store at the corner, and which I actually think is pretty charming, actually. But I think there's a way that we can kind of just attack a lot of these things at varying levels. We just need more information. We don't have enough data yet to deal with that. So we may phase it in. I think it's going to depend on what we hear from folks and where we land on all of this analysis.
Vice Chair Freeman.
Thanks, Chair. This question's for staff. I just went to the Engagement Milwaukie website for the neighborhood hubs. And I noticed there's a requirement to register to leave feedback. How are you reaching out to community members who don't wish to share their information and register?
Yeah, so this has been an interesting piece of trying to plan for the community engagement. We currently, I believe, city policy to require registration. So that is, I think some folks have at times expressed some barriers with signing up for Engage Milwaukie and needing to go through the registration process to participate. So to address your question about barriers, we're trying to do, and we presented to the Equity Steering Committee last month, and we've been talking through sort of some community engagement strategies to reach communities that haven't been engaged as much in the past. So we have a lot of interesting contacts and leads that we're going to follow up on, like a Spanish-speaking parent-teacher group at one of the local schools. And so we're going to try to pursue those avenues to get folks involved who maybe aren't going to go online and sign up that way and fill it out that way. And we're going to work on, translation, interpretation, anything we need to bridge those gaps and get those folks involved. And we have some general outreach strategies that we're currently trying to figure out as we build to a larger workshop later on in the project to try and mobilize folks to show up and go to that. And I think, doing renter-based outreach, trying to go to populations and people where we know community organizations working in the city of Milwaukee with populations we know aren't as represented in city projects. So
I think too, if I could jump in, I think part of the process, though, is to make sure that Engage Milwaukie is not the only way people can engage with us. So if registration is an issue or a barrier to folks, then our contact information as staff is on that page. People can reach out to us directly, and we can engage with people literally directly, in an interview or a conversation that way as well. So Engage Milwaukie isn't the only way. It's certainly a way, but we're going to try to make sure that we have other opportunities to engage with staff and engage with the project that addresses that concern. It's not the first time we've heard it. So we won't put all of our eggs in the Engage Milwaukie basket because of that. We know that that's an issue for folks. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Vice Chair Freeman. Commissioner Hemer.
Yeah, I just, when we look at a model of our hubs, our neighborhood hubs. Milwaukie Floral, I think, has thrived. Sure, they sell flowers, but they have a market that's like a First Friday market that goes on there. They host 2 NDAs for their NDA, and they are packed full because people love that place. I mean, Corey Beckman and Kelly Keener are probably the 2 people to talk to there. And even to that extent, Milwaukie Cafe, I don't live on that side of town, so I don't know how much business they really do, but I do know that they host an NDA meeting there as well.
Just last night, Arnwald.
Yeah, and one of the tricks is that there's opportunity here. Chapel Theater is another one that hosts an NDA. One of the tricks is that we used to use, the NDAs used to use schools, but now they're charging us for our government tax dollars being used as a public space. So now they're charging us to use it. So they are looking, right? NDAs are looking for these opportunities. I think businesses are looking for these opportunities, like for, even though that Milwaukie Floral doesn't sell anything during that time, it certainly gets people to their place. I know that the cafe sells beverages and food, or at least they buy food from them or something like that to serve. So there are opportunities for this. And I think of the local gas. I only go to one gas station in town. I won't tell you what I buy, but I buy gas and mints and other things there. But I mean, I know all the, I mean, you know, there are regulars that always kind of hang out there. And so, yeah, I mean, even a convenience store can be, you know, your neighborhood hub. And so I know space is limited and how we develop them and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting way to look at the world. And I'm with Commissioner Edge. This 20-minute thing is kind of cool because I have one that's in walking distance, well, rolling distance for me, but a little neighborhood convenience store that, you know, everybody kind of knows their names and the kids go get their candy while, you know, the adults get their wine. Kind of same sort of deal, you know.
So maybe to take the floor and chime in on a few things. I think one, excited to hear about kind of some of the diversity and engagement that you're planning this time around. I think that's great, and connecting with those property and business owners, as hard as that can be, I think is really valuable because, you know, just to reality check a little bit, you know, community can have an aspiration for what they want to see in the built environment, but at the end of the day, it's property owner's choice in terms of what's going to be happening with that property. And so I think connecting with those property owners to understand what they see as the barriers and the challenges and the opportunities, I think is going to be absolutely critical. And, you know, when I think about neighborhood hubs, living, you know, off of 32nd, right near that neighborhood hub, you know, the thing I think about is the competition that we kind of face regionally. You know, if we want to see 32nd or King or other places develop, we're competing against development opportunities in Selwood, development opportunities in Woodstock, development opportunities other places. And what is the land use zoning regulations in those places? And how do our regulations compare and contrast? And at the end of the day, compete against those opportunities, especially when those opportunities already have kind of the synergy of development and of places people want to go to begin with, which, as we, I think, saw in the presentation, some of our places haven't even been activated. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just a critical thing. I hope that can kind of be in the forefront of this project, because otherwise I just worry we're going to be engaging people's aspirations and dreams again and not having it grounded in kind of the market reality of development. So that's probably my most overarching kind of comment. I think I like the idea of also thinking about how hubs coordinate with things like the TSP, as was brought up. You know, a particular thing, and I guess it goes land use to transportation really fast, but is also thinking about sidewalk widths in these hubs. You know, somebody who walks down 32nd with two young children, often it's a little bit terrifying.
Or somebody walking down King to.
Or King, yeah. And King, maybe not so much the sidewalk widths because we have bike lanes, but the speeds, and just, it's not a very welcoming pedestrian environment. So I think we need to think about that interaction between land use and transportation really holistically, and not just from an economic or community development perspective, but also from a safety perspective. Maybe bring speeds down in some of these streets, and maybe we do that through the TSP, but it has a benefit on the economic development side. So that's, I think, a second thing. And, you know, a third thing, and we've talked about it before at the commission, is I hope you all and we all can get tactical onto the zoning map. You know, when I go down Woodstock, when I go down Tacoma, or not Tacoma, 13th, or even other parts of other cities, like Oswego Main Street, for example, you have both sides of the street zoned for this kind of development, not one side, and not skipping a parcel here and there. So I think we really need to get down to like the zoning map and what are the map changes that could be made to enable this kind of development. I think folks in Milwaukie are like rightful to be excited about it, but I think it's going to take some of those, like engaging with property owners, thinking about how we compete regionally, and thinking about those tactical map changes that is going to help realize this vision. Super excited about the project, and hope we can get another work session or two in. So thanks for taking time to take that feedback. Anything, Commissioner Carpenter?
Just to note that I live on 32nd and Malcolm, which is it's this old single-family residential lot, but it's been rezoned in 2015 for neighborhood commercial or neighborhood mixed use, I forget. And so I think my property would qualify as being part of this neighborhood hub area, which again, it's exciting. We've got hopes and dreams of how, what can we do with this property? And it's more of a conversation with my wife and I, but again, it's exciting to be a part of what our community's aspirations are for that particular area. And so again, happy that our city is looking at how to further along these programs. So yeah, that's a long-term project.
You'll be getting a postcard.
You'll get a postcard. Yeah. And you might have to announce actual or perceived conflicts of interest at some point.
I think that's maybe why I started saying that.
Justin on that.
Or you can be the representative of the planning commission onto that committee. There you go.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Joseph, Josh, Greg, Aaron, anything else on this, or we ready to move on?
I just want to say I agree with your points, Chair Sherman, about making sure that our regulations enable our commercial districts to compete. We need to be able to compete for investment. Otherwise, it's not going to come here. They will go somewhere else where that investment will be more welcome.
And I think knowing we have a packed house tonight, just to put a fine point on that, I think that part of that compete is going to maybe be a hard question for us as a community to answer. And, I think Commissioner Edge, yourself, Commissioner Heemer, Commissioner Losfeld were, I think, all on the commission when 32nd and Olson was slated up for development. And community members myself included, rallied and created some challenges for that project. There was concerns about height. There was concerns about parking. There was a lot of concerns. And I think it's going to be critical for us, both as commission and community members, because we are community members as well as staff, to have that frank conversation of like, well, do we want this? Do we want development or do we want nothing? Because that's kind of the choice we're making. And so I think we need to kind of get it figured out of, okay, yeah, maybe it will be 3 stories or maybe it will be 4 stories. And maybe that's the trade we have to make if we want more mom and pop stores and commercial storefronts that we can walk or bike to. You have some hard work ahead of you there. But it's exciting.
There's certainly a balance to strike between saying, we kind of have to do everything that we possibly can to invite, investment and development, and then also saying, well, we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that anything that comes here conforms to these exact, precise standards that is this idealistic vision for our community. It's always going to be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure that we're educating the public about what those compromises really mean when we're taking a hard line on certain particularly aesthetic positions.
Yep. True. Great. Well, if there's nothing else on this, I think we'll all be excited to see it come back, and all of us are also probably excited as we're getting closer to Commissioner Loesfeld's witching hour, getting closer to going home. Are there any other business or planning department updates for discussion?
Not that I'm aware of.
Nothing else there? Forecasts for
Can
future?
I add something real quick?
Sure.
May is Preservation Month. And it is based really on preserving buildings. But I want everybody to actually take a little bit of time, and because there is a time that comes into your life where you wish you would have asked your grandmother or your grandfather that question, your mother or your father to ask you that question, to learn more about your family history. Take that opportunity this May. And may I also say that, the Milwaukie Museum will, by the end of 2024, have a historic home inventory list, which is required by our comp plan, that will be so well done that they don't even need to hire a consultant to look at it. But as we look at our environment, remember that preservation is not the evil side of non-development. That it has economic, social, and really actually environmental good impacts. So when we talk about these neighborhood hubs and so on and so forth, let's think about preserving the buildings that we have there and how we can make them better instead of how we're going to invest in tearing them down and giving them better incentives. So as May is Preservation Month, I'll just leave you with that.
Thank you, Commissioner Hemer. Forecast for future meetings, looks like May 9th TBD. So hold your calendars there. May 23rd, some hearing items on the housing capacity analysis, psilocybin code, work session item, and the housing production strategy. Exciting topics in the future. Anything else on the future agenda?
No, I think that just the psilocybin code are specific regulations for psilocybin facilities in the city that came from a couple of work sessions with city council.
Right, I was going to say, I've watched a couple of those works. I thought that they just kind of decided what was going to happen.
But
now we gotta.
so now we're going through the
Okay,
hearing.
all right, got it.
So yeah, we needed direction from council first.
Great.
That was one of those rainy Friday nights. Great. Well, if there's nothing else from the commission, I'll entertain.
We do have.
Oh,
One
yes.
last
Oh, please.
thing,
Thank you. Yeah.
I just want to, I know I said this earlier, kind of when in the middle of, talking about, or in our deliberations. But the sixth and final meeting of the Housing Capacity Technical Committee is on Thursday at 6 p.m. And of course, you can zoom into it if you want to. I just wanted to point out that meeting is happening. We'll be reviewing, the proposed housing production strategies that have come out of that process. And so if you're interested, please attend. Or, also, please know I'm the Planning Commission representative on that committee. So you can certainly pass any thoughts or comments that you might have for me after reading those materials that, I could go share in that venue or whatever you'd like. I just wanted to remind everyone that that is happening, and Thursday at 6 p.m.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have a good night. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone?
Thanks.